Ominous music swells, a ticking clock in the background. A letter arrives too late. 2 months late. Its cryptic words, scrawled by a woman now dead. The dog's ball, she wrote, a desperate plea to Hercule Poirot. Why was it delayed? Who silenced her cry for help? At Little Green House, shadows whisper of greed, betrayal, and a fatal fall. Was it an accident, or murder? Bob, a loyal terrier, knows more than he can say, his silent gaze holding the key to a killer's secret. Can Poirot unravel the truth before the poison strikes again? Music crescendos join the master detective in a chilling puzzle of deception, where every clue leads to a shocking revelation. Chapter 1. The letter from the past. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Hercule Poirot's London flat, casting a golden glow across the polished mahogany table where he sat, impeccable as ever, in a crisp suit, his mustache waxed to perfection. The air carried the faint aroma of coffee, brewed precisely to his specifications, and the distant hum of London's waking streets drifted through the open window. It was April 28, 1936, a day that promised routine but, as Poirot would soon discover, held the seeds of an extraordinary mystery. Poirot's morning ritual was each letter, each parcel, was opened with the precision of a surgeon, his small, deft hands moving with a rhythm that spoke of order and method. His friend and confidant, Captain Arthur Hastings, lounged in an armchair nearby, a newspaper folded carelessly across his lap. Hastings, with his earnest face and perpetually bemused expression, was the perfect foil to Poirot's meticulous nature, a man of action who preferred the open fields to the confines of deductive reasoning. "Really, Poirot," Hastings said, stifling a yawn, "you treat your post as if it were a military campaign. One would think you're expecting a coded message from a spy." Poirot's eyes twinkled, though his face remained composed. "Mon cher Hastings, the post is a battlefield of the mind. Each envelope may conceal a secret, a plea, or a puzzle. One must approach it with respect." He held up a silver letter opener, its blade glinting in the sunlight. "And with the proper tools," Hastings chuckled, shaking his head, "you'll find nothing but bills and invitations to dull dinners. Mark my words." But Poirot's attention had already shifted to the small stack of envelopes before him. His fingers paused over one in particular, a cream-colored envelope, slightly yellowed at the edges, with a postmark that caught his eye. He tilted his head, his brow furrowing as he examined the date, April 17, 1936. Yet, the envelope bore a second, fainter postmark, dated June 26, 1936, over 2 months later. His mustache twitched, a sign Hastings recognized as the stirring of Poirot's formidable grey cells. "Curio," Poirot murmured, slicing open the envelope with a single, precise stroke. He unfolded the letter within, his eyes scanning the elegant, if slightly tremulous, handwriting. The paper smelled faintly of lavender, and the ink was a deep indigo, suggesting care in its composition. Poirot read aloud, his voice measured, each word enunciated with the clarity of a stage actor. "Dear Monsieur Poirot, I trust this letter finds you in good health. My name is Emily Arundell, and I reside at Little Green House in Market Basing, Berkshire. I am not given to fanciful notions, but I find myself in need of your expertise. An incident has occurred, nothing overt, mind you, but troubling nonetheless. It concerns a dog's ball, of all things, and a fall that was no accident. I fear I cannot trust those around me. I implore you to visit at your earliest convenience. Discretion is paramount. Yours sincerely, Emily Arundell." Poirot's voice trailed off, and he leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. The room fell silent, save for the ticking of the ormolu clock on the mantelpiece. Hastings, who had been half listening, sat up, his curiosity piqued by the oddity of the letter. "A dog's ball," he said, incredulous. "What sort of mystery involves a dog's ball? Sounds like the old lady's gone a bit dotty." Poirot shot him a reproachful glance. "Hastings, you dismiss too quickly. The simplest objects, a ball, a hairpin, a cup of tea can, conceal the darkest intentions. And this delay," he tapped the envelope, his eyes narrowing. "Why does a letter dated April 17th arrive in June? This is not the work of a forgetful postman. Nan, there is method here, or perhaps malice." Hastings frowned, leaning forward to inspect the envelope. "Perhaps it was lost in the post. These things happen, you know. My cousin once sent me a Christmas card that arrived in March." Poirot shook his head, his expression one of patient Exasperation. Your cousin's card is not a plea for help from a woman who fears for her safety. No, Hastings, this delay is significant. It suggests interference, perhaps oppression. We must consider who might benefit from such a delay. He rose, his movements brisk yet graceful, and crossed to the window, where he gazed out at the bustling street below. London was alive with the clatter of horse-drawn carts and the hum of motor cars, a city caught between tradition and progress. Poirot, however, was lost in thought, his mind already piecing together the fragments of this nascent puzzle. "Let us examine the facts," he said, turning back to Hastings. "Mademoiselle Arundell writes of an incident, a fall, caused by a dog's ball. She suspects foul play, yet she does not elaborate. She is cautious, discreet, yet urgent. And then, the letter is delayed for over 2 months. Why? Was it intercepted? Held back deliberately? And if so, by whom?" Hastings scratched his head, his honest face creasing with confusion. "But why write to you at all? Surely a local constable could handle a tripped-over dog toy." Poirot's smile was faint, but knowing, because mon ami, Mademoiselle Arundell, is no ordinary woman. She has heard of Hercule Poirot, and she knows that only I can unravel a mystery that hides in plain sight. The dog's ball is not the puzzle, it is the clue. The morning wore on, and Poirot's flat became a hive of quiet activity. He summoned his secretary, Miss Lemon, a woman of such efficiency that she seemed to anticipate his needs before he voiced them. Her typewriter clacked rhythmically as she prepared a dossier on Market Basing, a sleepy market town in Berkshire, known for its annual fair and little else. Poirot, meanwhile, pored over the letter, rereading each line as if it might yield a hidden code. "Miss Lemon," he called, "have you found anything of note about Little Green House, or Miss Emily Arundell?" Miss Lemon adjusted her spectacles, her expression as composed as ever. "Little Green House is a Georgian manor, owned by the Arundell family for 3 generations. Miss Emily Arundell is a spinster, aged approximately 70, known for her philanthropy and her love of dogs. She has a wire-haired terrier named Bob, by all accounts a lively creature. The local gossip, as reported in the Market Basing Gazette, suggests she is wealthy but frugal, with a complicated family." Poirot nodded, absorbing the information. "And the family? 2 nieces, Teresa and Bella, and a nephew, Charles. Teresa is engaged to a Dr. Donaldson, a local physician. Bella is married to a Dr. Tanios, a Greek emigre. Charles is unmarried, known for his charm and his debts. There are rumors of tension over Miss Arundell's fortune." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A fortune, you say? And a family divided. This is fertile ground for motive. Nest C.P.A. Hastings, who had been sipping his coffee, set down his cup with a clink. "You're making a mountain out of a molehill. Poirot, an old lady trips over a dog's toy, writes a dramatic letter, and it gets lost in the post. She's probably fine now, sipping tea and petting her terrier." Poirot's gaze was sharp. "And if she is not fine, Hastings, if this letter was her final cry for help, we cannot ignore it. We must go to Market Basing." Hastings groaned, sensing the end of his quiet week in London. "To Berkshire, for a dog's ball. You'll have me chasing my tail next." Poirot ignored the jest, his mind already racing ahead. He crossed to his desk, where a map of England lay spread out, and traced a finger along the route to Market Basing. "We shall take the midday train. It is a journey of 2 hours, perhaps less. We will arrive by afternoon, and then, mon ami, we shall see what secrets Little Green House holds." The preparations were swift. Miss Lemon booked 2 first-class tickets, while Poirot packed a small valise with the essentials, a spare pair of gloves, a notebook, and a tin of his favorite herbal tea. Hastings, grumbling but loyal, retrieved his hat and coat, his sense of adventure stirring despite his protests. As they left the flat, Poirot paused at the door, the letter from Emily Arundell in his hand. He studied it once more, his eyes lingering on the phrase, "a fall that was no accident." The words seemed to pulse with urgency, a silent plea from a woman he had never met but whose fear he could almost feel. The journey to Paddington Station was a blur of London's chaotic charm. The streets were alive with vendors hawking newspapers, children darting between cabs, and the occasional bobby directing traffic with a stern wave. Poirot, ever observant, noted the details: a woman in a green hat dropping her glove, a man with a nervous tick glancing at his watch, a stray dog sniffing at a lamppost. Each was a thread in the tapestry of life, and Poirot wove them into his understanding of human nature. At the station, the air was thick with steam and the clamour of departure. The train to Market Basing awaited, its engine puffing like a contented dragon. Poirot and Hastings settled into their compartment, the plush seats a stark contrast to the mystery awaiting them. Hastings, ever practical, opened his newspaper, but Poirot's gaze was fixed out the window, where the city gave way to rolling fields. "Tell me, Hastings," Poirot said, breaking the silence, "what do you make of a woman who writes of a dog's ball as if it were a weapon?" Hastings lowered his paper, frowning. "I suppose she's confused. Old age, perhaps. Or she's overly fond of her pet and sees mischief where there's none." Poirot shook his head. "None. Miss Arundell is precise in her language. She does not say I tripped over the ball. She says a fall that was no accident. There is intent behind those words, a clarity of thought. She suspects someone in her household, someone close." Hastings leaned back, his interest piqued. Despite himself, "You think someone tried to harm her. But why? And why involve a dog's ball?" "That, mon ami, is what we shall discover. The dog, this Bob, is central to the mystery. He is, perhaps, the silent spectator, the dumb witness who sees all but cannot speak." The train rattled on, its rhythm a counterpoint to Poirot's thoughts. He closed his eyes, not to sleep but to visualize Little Green House, its inhabitants, and the unseen currents of greed or fear that might swirl within its walls. Hastings, meanwhile, watched the countryside pass, his mind drifting to simpler days of cricket matches and country picnics as they neared Market Basing. The landscape grew softer, the fields dotted with sheep, and the occasional stone wall. The town itself was a picture of rural England, red brick cottages, a church spire piercing the sky, and a marketplace bustling with farmers and their wares. The station was small, its platform lined with flower baskets that swayed in the breeze. Stepped onto the platform, his patent leather shoes gleaming despite the dust. He inhaled deeply, savoring the clean air. This, Hastings, is where the puzzle begins. Little Green House awaits, and with it, the truth. Hastings adjusted his hat, his skepticism warring with his loyalty. "I hope you're right, Poirot. I'd hate to think we've come all this way for a wild goose chase." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Geese, mon ami, do not write letters. And this goose, I suspect, has been silenced. Come, let us find a cab." They secured a horse-drawn cab, driven by a grizzled man named Tom, who knew Little Green House well. "Miss Arundell's place," he said, his voice rough but friendly. "Fine old house, that. Shame about her passing, though. Went sudden, they say." Poirot's head snapped up. "Passing? Mademoiselle Arundell is dead." Tom nodded, flicking the reins. "Aye, back in May. Liver trouble, the doctor said." Whole town was shocked, her being so spry. Poirot and Hastings exchanged a glance, the weight of the news settling over them like a fog. The letter, written in April, had arrived too late. Emily Arundell was gone, and with her, perhaps, the chance to prevent a tragedy. Yet eyes burned with determination. "Then our task is clear," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the clop of hooves. "We must uncover what this silent witness saw, and why her cry for help was delayed. The dog's ball, Hastings, is the key." The cab wound through Market Basing, past the market square where vendors called out prices for apples and fresh bread, past the church where a wedding party spilled onto the lawn, their laughter a stark contrast to the mystery unfolding. Little Green House loomed in the distance, its Georgian facade both grand and foreboding, its windows like eyes watching their approach. As the cab drew closer, Poirot clutched the letter, its words etched in his memory. "A fall that was no accident," he murmured. "We shall see, Mademoiselle Arundell. We shall see." Chapter 2. The shadow of Little Green House. The train's rhythmic clatter faded as it pulled into Market Basing's quaint station. A sleepy platform nestled amidst rolling green hills. Hercule Poirot, his patent leather shoes gleaming despite the dust of travel, stepped onto the platform with the precision of a metronome. Captain Hastings followed, his tweed suit slightly rumpled, his eyes bright with the anticipation of adventure. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows, and a brisk breeze carried the scent of freshly cut hay. Poirot adjusted his Homburg hat, his moustache twitching as he surveyed the rural scene. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice low but carrying the weight of certainty. There is something in the air, hear a whisper of secrets. The countryside, it pretends to be tranquil, but it hides much beneath its green veil. Hastings, ever the optimist, grinned. Oh, come now, Poirot. It's just a charming village. Surely not every hedgerow hides a mystery. Poirot's green eyes glinted with amusement. You will see, Hastings. The letter from Mademoiselle Arundell was no idle scribble. 2 months delayed, and now she is dead. Nan, there is method in this madness. They hired a horse-drawn cart from a grizzled driver, who eyed Poirot's fastidious attire with mild amusement. The journey to Little Green House took them through winding lanes, past stone walls draped with ivy, and fields dotted with grazing sheep. The house itself loomed at the end of a gravelled drive, a Georgian manor of weathered stone, its windows like watchful eyes. Ivy clung to its walls, and a towering oak cast a shadow across the lawn, giving the estate an air of quiet melancholy. As they approached, a small, wiry shape darted from the porch, a wire-haired terrier, its ears pricked and tail wagging furiously. Clutched in its jaws was a rubber ball, slightly worn but clearly cherished. The dog bounded toward them, dropping the ball at Poirot's feet with an expectant bark. "Bonjour, Petit Chen," Poirot said, bending slightly to regard the creature. "You must be Bob, n'est-ce pas?" A most enthusiastic greeter. Hastings chuckled, crouching to pat the dog. "Friendly little chap, isn't he? Looks like he owns the place." The front door creaked open, and a woman in her late 50s appeared, her grey hair pinned neatly beneath a starched cap. Her face was kind but guarded, her hands smoothing her apron as she stepped forward. "Good afternoon, gentlemen. I'm Ellen, the housekeeper. You must be Mr. Poirot and Captain Hastings. We weren't expecting visitors." Poirot bowed slightly. "Madame Ellen, a pleasure. I am Hercule Poirot, and this is my associate, Captain Hastings. We come regarding a matter concerning the late Miss Emily Arundell. May we enter?" Ellen's eyes flickered with unease, but she nodded. "Of course, sir. Come in. The family's just arrived for the reading of the will tomorrow. It's a difficult time." The entrance hall was grand yet sombre, with polished oak floors and a chandelier that gleamed faintly in the dim light. Portraits of stern-faced Arundells lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow the visitors. Bob scampered ahead, his claws clicking on the floor, the ball still in his mouth. Ellen led them to a drawing-room where a fire crackled, casting dancing shadows across heavy velvet curtains and a mahogany table set for tea. Seated there were 3 figures, each distinct in demeanour. Miss Wilhelmina Lawson, Emily's companion, was a slight woman with nervous hands and darting eyes, her plain dress contrasting with the room's opulence. Charles Arundell, Emily's nephew, lounged with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to charm, his tailored suit slightly too flashy for the countryside. His sister, Teresa, radiated glamour, her silk dress clinging to her slender frame, her dark hair swept into an elegant chignon. She smoked a cigarette in a long holder, her gaze cool and assessing. Poirot introduced himself with his usual flourish, noting the subtle shifts in their expressions. Miss Lawson's flinch, Charles's raised eyebrow, Teresa's faint smirk. "I received a letter from Miss Arundell," Poirot began, dated April 17th, expressing concern about an incident at this house. "Tragically, I understand she passed on May 1st. I wish to understand the circumstances." Miss Lawson's teacup rattled in its saucer. "A letter, oh my! Emily did write many letters, but she never mentioned anything to me about trouble." Charles leaned forward, his smile sharp. "Uncle Hercule, is it? Look, Aunt Emily was old, sick, liver trouble, the doctor said. She fell down the stairs, lingered a bit, then passed. Sad, but hardly a case for a detective." "Charles," Teresa's voice was sharp, her eyes narrowing. "Don't be so crass. Aunt Emily was perfectly fine before that fall. And you know she wasn't pleased with you borrowing her money for that ridiculous boat of yours." Charles's grin didn't waver, but his knuckles whitened around his cup. "Oh, Tess, always the moralist. As if you didn't beg her for cash to fund your London parties." Poirot raised a hand, silencing the brewing spat. "The fall. It interests me. Where did it occur?" Ellen, who had lingered by the door, spoke up. "On the main staircase, sir. Miss Emily tripped on Bob's ball. Poor dear. She was shaken but seemed to recover. Then, well, her health failed." Poirot's mustache twitched. "The ball of C.E. Petit Chen. Most curious. May I see this staircase?" Ellen led them to the grand staircase, a sweeping curve of oak with a polished banister. Bob followed, dropping his ball at the base and barking once, as if to emphasize its presence. Poirot knelt, his gloved fingers tracing the steps, pausing at a faint scuff mark near the top. "This ball," he murmured, "it is not so innocent." Perhaps Hastings frowned. "Poirot, it's just a dog's toy. Surely you don't think—" "I think, mon ami, that accidents are rarely accidental," Poirot replied, his voice soft but firm. He picked up the ball, examining its worn surface, then handed it back to Bob, who seized it eagerly. Dinner that evening was a tense affair. The dining room, with its long table and silver candelabra, felt like a stage for unspoken grievances. Charles regaled them with tales of his water-speed record attempt, his voice loud and boastful, while Teresa picked at her food, her eyes distant. Miss Lawson, seated at the far end, murmured about Emily's love for Bob, her voice trembling. As she described the dog's loyalty, "Bob slept in her room every night," Miss Lawson said, her eyes misty. "After the fall, he wouldn't leave her side." "Such a clever creature," Poirot nodded, his gaze fixed on the housekeeper. "And you, Madame Ellen, you saw nothing unusual the night of the fall?" Ellen hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap. "It was late, sir. I heard a thud, then Miss Emily crying out. I found her at the bottom of the stairs, Bob barking like mad. The ball was there, just lying on the step." Teresa's cigarette paused mid-air. "You're not suggesting someone placed it there, are you, Mr. Poirot? That's absurd." "Is it?" Poirot's tone was mild, but his eyes were sharp. The mind of Hercule Poirot does not dismiss possibilities so quickly. After dinner, Poirot requested a tour of the grounds. The moon hung low, casting silver light across the manicured lawn and flower beds. Bob trotted alongside, his ball now tucked under a bush as if he sensed the gravity of the moment. Poirot paused by the staircase's exterior window, noting its proximity to the garden path. "Hastings," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "observe the ground here. The earth is disturbed, as if someone stood for a long time, watching." Hastings squinted, seeing only shadows. "You're imagining things, Poirot. It's just dirt, non mon ami. It is evidence. And this ball," he gestured to Bob, who had retrieved his toy and dropped it at Poirot's feet, "is no accident. It is a clue, perhaps the key to this puzzle." As they returned to the house, the night air grew heavy, the silence broken only by Bob's soft whine. Poirot's mind was already turning, piecing together the fragments of a mystery that seemed to grow darker with every step. The shadow of Little Green House loomed larger now, its secrets waiting to be unraveled. The narrative unfolded over the next few days, with Poirot and Hastings settling into guest rooms at Little Green House. At Ellen's reluctant insistence, the household was a tapestry of tension, each thread pulling tighter as the will's reading loomed. Poirot's presence seemed to unsettle everyone, his polite questions cutting through their defenses like a scalpel. Miss Lawson, in particular, was a study in nerves. During a morning walk in the garden, Poirot found her pruning roses with shaking hands. "You loved Mademoiselle Arundell, did you not?" he asked, his tone gentle but probing. "Oh yes, sir," Miss Lawson replied, her voice catching. "She was so kind to me, giving me a home, a purpose. But she was worried. Those last weeks, kept talking about Bob's ball, how it couldn't have been there." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And what did you think of this worry?" Miss Lawson hesitated, her shears snipping a rose too harshly. "I thought she was imagining things. Old age, you know. But now, I'm not so sure." Charles, meanwhile, was a whirlwind of charm and deflection. Over a game of billiards in the house's oak-panelled game room, he regaled Hastings with stories of his exploits on the water. "Aunt Emily didn't understand ambition," he said, chalking his cue. "Thought I was wasting her money. But I'll show her posthumously, of course." Hastings, ever susceptible to charisma, laughed. "You're a rogue, Charles. But you didn't, you know, do anything to hasten her departure, did you?" Charles's smile faltered, his eyes cold for a moment. "Careful, Captain. That's a dangerous question. I loved my aunt, in my way. Besides, I was in London when she fell." Teresa, by contrast, was a study in controlled elegance. Poirot observed her during an afternoon tea on the terrace, her movements graceful but her eyes restless. "You are engaged, Mademoiselle Teresa?" he asked, sipping his tisane. "To Dr. Donaldson," she replied, her tone clipped. "Aunt Emily didn't approve, said he was too dull for me." She wasn't wrong, but love isn't always about excitement, is it? Poirot tilted his head. And yet, you seemed dissatisfied. Perhaps with more than your fiancé's lips curved into a wry smile. You're sharp, Mr. Poirot. Let's just say Aunt Emily's money would have made life easier. For all of us, the days were punctuated by Bob's constant presence, his ball a recurring motif. Poirot watched the dog closely, noting how he never left the ball on the stairs, always carrying it to his basket in the kitchen. One evening, as the household retired, Poirot lingered on the staircase, his torch illuminating the scuff mark he'd noticed earlier. He knelt, his fingers brushing the wood, and found a faint indentation, barely visible. "Hastings," he called softly, "come here. What do you see?" Hastings peered over his shoulder. "Just a mark, Poirot, probably from years of use." "Nan," Poirot said, his voice intense, "this is recent, and it is not from a shoe. It is deliberate." The next morning Poirot requested a private meeting with Ellen in the pantry, a small room lined with jars of preserves and sacks of flour. Bob lay at her feet, his ball beside him. "Madame Ellen," Poirot began, "you have been with Mademoiselle Arundell many years. You know this house, its rhythms. Tell me, did you ever see anyone on the stairs before her fall? Anyone who should not have been there?" Ellen's face paled, her hands clutching her apron. I don't know, sir. It was dark, and I was in my room. But Bob, he was restless that night, kept whining, like he sensed something wrong." Poirot nodded, his eyes on the dog. "And this ball, it was found on the step after the fall. Yet Bob, he is a disciplined creature, is he not? He does not leave his treasures carelessly." Ellen's eyes widened. "You think someone put it there?" "Oh, sir, that's a terrible thought." "Terrible, perhaps," Poirot said, "but necessary. The truth, Madame Ellen, is often uncomfortable." As the day of the will's reading approached, the household's tension became palpable. Charles and Teresa bickered openly, their voices carrying through the house's thick walls. Miss Lawson retreated into silence, her eyes red-rimmed, as if she'd been crying. Even Bob seemed subdued, his usual exuberance tempered by the atmosphere. Poirot, undeterred, continued his observations. He noted the layout of the house, the creak of certain floorboards, the way the moonlight fell through the staircase window. He spoke little, but his mind was a whirlwind of connections, each detail slotting into place like pieces of a jigsaw. One evening, as a storm brewed outside, Poirot and Hastings sat by the fire in the drawing-room. The wind howled, rattling the windows, and Bob curled up at Poirot's feet, his ball tucked beneath his paws. Hastings, sipping a brandy, broke the silence. "Poirot, do you really think there's foul play here? It could just be a tragic accident. Old lady, dark stairs, a dog's toy." Poirot's eyes gleamed in the firelight. "An accident, Hastings, perhaps. But consider, a letter delayed, a fall that was not fatal, a death too convenient. And this ball, always this ball, it is a symbol, mon ami, of something far darker." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "This ball, mon ami, is no accident. It is a message, a challenge, and Hercule Poirot will answer it." The storm broke, rain lashing the windows, and Bob lifted his head, his ears pricked. Poirot smiled, patting the dog gently. "Patience, Petit Chen. You and I, we shall uncover the truth together." Chapter 3. Whispers of motive. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Little Green House, casting long dappled shadows across the oak-panelled dining room where Hercule Poirot sat, his small, precise hands folded neatly before him. The air was thick with the scent of polished wood and the faint, lingering aroma of toast and kippers from breakfast. Captain Hastings, seated across from him, stirred his tea absently, his brow furrowed as he tried to make sense of the peculiar atmosphere that hung over the Arundell household. The table, now cleared, bore only a silver tray with a decanter of water and a few glasses, reflecting the sunlight in sharp, fleeting glints. Poirot's eyes, bright and unyielding, darted about the room, taking in every detail: the faded tapestry on the wall, the slight tremor in the housekeeper Ellen's hands as she lingered by the door, and the restless energy of Bob, the wire-haired terrier, who paced near the hearth, his rubber ball clutched tightly in his jaws. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice soft yet commanding, "do you not find it curious? This house, it is as if it holds its breath, waiting for a secret to be spoken." Hastings looked up, his spoon clinking against the porcelain cup. "It's a gloomy place, I'll grant you that, Poirot. But I don't see anything particularly sinister. Old houses like this always have a certain weight to them. And Miss Arundell's death, well, it sounds like a sad but natural end. Liver trouble, wasn't it?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a subtle sign of his disagreement. "Natural, you say? Perhaps. But the letter, Hastings, the letter that arrived 2 months too late, speaking of the dog's ball and a fall. That was no accident. Does that not suggest something more? Nan, I smelled the scent of intrigue, and it is strong here." Before Hastings could respond, the door swung open, and Miss Minnie Lawson, Emily Arundell's companion, entered. She was a woman in her late 40s, her thin frame swathed in a shapeless grey dress that seemed to blend into the muted tones of the room. Her eyes, magnified by thick spectacles, darted nervously between Poirot and Hastings, and her fingers twisted the edge of her shawl as she approached. "Monsieur," she began, her voice high and tremulous, I hope you slept well. I'm terribly sorry about the inconvenience of your visit, especially since dear Emily is no longer with us. I can't imagine what brought you here, but I'll do my best to assist." Poirot inclined his head, his expression one of polite curiosity, though his eyes gleamed with a sharpness that belied his gentle tone. "Mademoiselle Lawson, your kindness is appreciated. It is precisely because of Mademoiselle Arundell that I am here. A letter, you see, written by her own hand, reached me only yesterday. It spoke of an incident, a fall, perhaps not accidental, and of her fears. I wish to understand these fears. Will you help me?" Miss Lawson's face paled, and she sank into a chair, her hands fluttering like trapped birds. "A letter? Oh, dear me, I had no idea." Emily was terribly shaken after her fall. "You know, she said things, strange things, about someone wanting her gone, but I thought it was just her nerves, or perhaps the laudanum Dr. Groinger prescribed for the pain." Poirot leaned forward, his voice smooth as velvet. "And what did she say?" "Precisely, about this fall. She mentioned a dog's ball, did she not?" Miss Lawson's eyes widened, and she glanced at Bob, who had dropped his ball, and now stared at her with an unsettling intensity. Yes, she did. She kept saying it was Bob's ball on the stairs that caused her to trip. But Bob is such a good dog, always so careful. I couldn't believe he'd leave his ball there, and yet she was so certain." Hastings, unable to resist, interjected, "But surely, Miss Lawson, a dog's ball could roll onto the stairs by accident. Dogs are playful creatures, after all." Miss Lawson shook her head vehemently, her glasses slipping down her nose. "No, Captain Hastings, you don't understand. Bob is trained. He knows his place. Emily was very particular about his habits. He sleeps in the kitchen at night, and his ball is kept in a basket there. Someone must have placed it on the stairs." Poirot's fingers steepled beneath his chin, his gaze fixed on Miss Lawson. "Someone, you say? Did Mademoiselle Arundell have suspicions about who this someone might be?" Miss Lawson hesitated, her lips parting as if to speak, then closing again. She glanced toward the door, as if expecting an eavesdropper, before leaning closer. To Poirot she didn't name anyone outright, but she was worried about her family. Charles and Teresa, you see, they were always asking for money. And Bella, poor dear, with those children to care for. Emily felt they were all waiting for her to die. She even said to me once, "Minnie, I fear one of them wishes me gone sooner than nature intends." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Hastings shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier skepticism giving way to a flicker of unease. Poirot, however, remained impassive, though his eyes gleamed with a quiet triumph, as if a piece of the puzzle had slotted into place. "Merci, Mademoiselle Lawson," Poirot said at last. "You have been most helpful. May I ask one more question? Did Mademoiselle Arundell alter her will in the days before her death?" Miss Lawson's hands froze, and a flush crept up her neck. Her will? Why, yes, she did. She called in Mr. Purvis, the solicitor, just after her fall. I believe she made some changes, but I don't know the details. She didn't confide in me about that." Poirot nodded, though his expression suggested he was not entirely convinced by her claim of ignorance. "Very well, we shall speak again, I am sure. For now, perhaps you could arrange for me to meet the other members of the household." Miss Lawson rose, her movements jerky, and bobbed a nervous curtsy before hurrying from the room. As the door closed behind her, Hastings let out a low whistle. Good heavens, Poirot, do you think she's telling the truth? She seems as jumpy as a cat in a thunderstorm. Poirot smiled faintly, his fingers tapping a rhythm on the arm of his chair. Mademoiselle Lawson is a woman who sees much and says little, yet her silences speak volumes. She knows more than she reveals. Hastings, but come, let us explore this house further. The little grey cells, they demand exercise. The morning passed in a whirl of introductions and observations. Poirot and Hastings met Charles Arundell, Emily's nephew, in the garden, where he lounged against a stone bench, a cigarette dangling from his lips. Charles was in his early 30s, with a sort of effortless charm that could disarm a saint. His dark hair was slicked back, and his tailored suit, though slightly worn at the cuffs, spoke of a man who lived beyond his means. He greeted Poirot with a lazy grin, his eyes glinting with amusement. "So, you're the famous detective, eh?" Charles said, exhaling a plume of smoke. "Come to poke around Aunt Emily's affairs. I warn you, there's not much to find. She was a dear old thing, but stubborn as a mule. Fell down the stairs, poor soul, and that was that." Poirot's smile was polite, but cool. "Monsieur Arundell, I am interested in the circumstances of that fall. You were here at Little Green House when it occurred?" Charles's grin faltered, but only for a moment. "Oh, sure, I was around. Teresa and I came down for Easter, hoping to soften the old girl up for a bit of cash. My speedboat venture, you know, world record, attempt on Lake Windermere next month. Costs a fortune to keep the thing afloat." He chuckled, but the sound was hollow. "Anyway, Aunt Emily wasn't in a giving mood. She took that tumble the night we arrived, and we all thought she'd recover. Tough as nails, she was, and the dogs bawl." Poirot pressed, his tone deceptively mild. "You saw it on the stairs?" Charles shrugged, flicking ash onto the gravel path. "Can't say I did. Ellen said it was there, and Aunt Emily was convinced Bob was to blame. But I was in the billiard room with Teresa when it happened. Heard the crash, ran out, found her at the bottom of the stairs, gave us all a fright." Poirot nodded, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And your aunt's will, were you aware of her intentions to change it?" Charles's expression darkened, and he stubbed out his cigarette with more force than necessary. "Look, I don't know anything about her will. She was always threatening to cut us off, me and Teresa. Said we were feckless, whatever that means. If she changed it, I wouldn't be surprised. But you'd have to ask Miss Lawson. She was always hovering around like a vulture." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Teresa Arundell, who swept into the garden like a film star, stepping onto a set. She was strikingly beautiful, with auburn hair pinned in elegant waves, and a silk dress that clung to her slender frame. Her dark eyes sparkled with a mixture of mischief and defiance as she approached, her heels clicking on the path. "Charles, darling, you're not boring our guests with your speedboat nonsense, are you?" she teased, her voice low and melodic. She turned to Poirot, extending a gloved hand. "Monsieur Poirot, I'm Teresa Arundell. I've heard so much about you. I do hope you're not here to make trouble." Poirot took her hand with a courtly bow. "Mademoiselle, I seek only the truth. Your aunt's letter suggested she feared for her life. Have you any thoughts on who might have caused her such fear?" Teresa's smile tightened, and she withdrew, her hand glancing at Charles. "Aunt Emily was always dramatic. She didn't approve of my engagement to Rex Dr. Donaldson, you know, thought he was too serious for me. And Charles, well, she thought he was a wastrel, but murder, that's absurd. She fell, and then she got sick. It happens to old people." Hastings, who had been watching Teresa with undisguised admiration, cleared his throat. "Your fiancé, Dr. Donaldson, he's a local man, I take it." Teresa's eyes softened, but there was a flicker of unease in them. "Yes, Rex is a physician in Market Basing. Brilliant, really, but terribly busy with his research. He was here for dinner the night of Aunt Emily's fall, but he left early. He's not much for family squabbles." Poirot's moustache twitched again, and Hastings could almost hear the gears turning in his friend's mind. "Dr. Donaldson is a man of science." Then Poirot said, "Perhaps I shall speak with him. Science, it can reveal much, or conceal much." Teresa laughed, a brittle sound that echoed in the quiet garden. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, you do have a way with words. Come, let me show you the rose garden." Aunt Emily was so proud of it. As they followed Teresa, Hastings leaned close to Poirot and whispered, "She's charming, isn't she? But there's something off about her. And Charles, too." They're both so casual about their aunt's death. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Precisement, Hastings. They are too casual, perhaps. But it is not their words that interest MIT, is what they do not say. The rose garden was a riot of color, with blooms in every shade of red, pink, and white, their perfume heavy in the warm air. Teresa led them along a winding path, pointing out her aunt's favorite varieties with a practiced ease that suggested she was eager to change the subject. Bob, who had followed them from the house, bounded ahead, his ball still in his mouth, until he stopped abruptly near a small garden shed tucked behind a row of hawthorns. Poirot paused, his attention caught by the dog's sudden stillness. "What is it, mon petit ami?" he murmured, crouching beside Bob. The terrier dropped his ball and began to paw at the shed's door, his tail wagging furiously. Teresa frowned, her composure slipping. "Oh, that old shed. It's just where the gardener keeps his tools. Bob's always sniffing around. There probably smells a rat or something." But Poirot was already moving toward the shed, his small, neat figure radiating purpose. He pushed open the creaking door, revealing a cluttered interior, rakes, shovels, and sacks of fertilizer piled haphazardly. A dusty shelf held jars of seeds, and a few unlabeled bottles. Poirot's gloved hand reached for one, a small, stoppered vial containing a fine white powder. He held it up to the light, his expression unreadable. "Hastings," he said softly, "do you recall the chemist in Market Basing? He spoke of a gentleman purchasing a substance unusual." Nan Hastings nodded, his heart quickening. "You think this is it? Some kind of poison?" Poirot slipped the vial into his pocket, his movements deliberate. "We shall see, mon ami. But I suspect this shed holds more than gardening tools. Come, we must return to the house. The day grows late, and the shadows, they deepen." As they walked back, Teresa trailing behind with a forced smile, Hastings couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The garden, so beautiful in the sunlight, seemed to pulse with secrets, and Bob's eager barking felt like a warning. Poirot, however, was serene, his eyes bright with the thrill of the chase. Back in the drawing room, Poirot settled into an armchair, his fingers tapping rhythmically as he reviewed the morning's findings. Hastings paced, unable to sit still. "Poirot, this is getting serious. That powder, do you really think someone poisoned Miss Arundell? And who?" "Charles, Teresa, Miss Lawson." Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "Patience, Hastings. The little grey cells, they are at work. Consider the motives. Charles, he is in debt, desperate for funds. Teresa, she chafes under her aunt's disapproval, perhaps eager for freedom. Miss Lawson, so nervous, so loyal, yet she inherits, does she not? And then there is Dr. Donaldson, the scientist, who knows the ways of chemicals. Each has a thread in this tapestry, but which is the thread that unravels it all?" Before Hastings could respond, the door opened, and Ellen entered, carrying a tray of tea. Bob trotted at her heels, his ball now tucked under his chin. "Monsieur Poirot," Ellen said, her voice steady but her eyes wary, "I've brought some refreshment, and I heard you were asking about the fall. I don't know if it matters, but I found something odd that night, after Miss Emily was taken to her room." Poirot leaned forward, his interest piqued. "And what was this, Madame Ellen?" She hesitated, then reached into her apron pocket and produced a small, tarnished key. It was on the floor, near the bottom of the stairs. "I thought it might belong to one of the guests, but no one claimed it. I kept it, just in case." Poirot took the key, turning it over in his hands. It was small, with an ornate design, unlike the heavy iron keys used in the house. "Most interesting," he murmured. "This key, it may unlock more than a door." "Merci, madame." As Ellen left, Poirot rose, his energy renewed. "Come, Hastings, we must take a walk. The evening air, it clears the mind, and Bob, I think, has more to show us." The sun was setting as Poirot and Hastings stepped into the grounds of Little Green House, the sky streaked with crimson and gold. Bob led the way, his nose to the ground, his ball abandoned in favor of some new scent. The air was cool now, carrying the faint tang of wood smoke from a distant cottage. Poirot walked slowly, his cane tapping the path, his eyes scanning the landscape as if it held the answers to his questions. They followed Bob to a copse of trees at the edge of the estate, where the dog began to dig furiously at the base of an ancient oak. Hastings knelt beside him, brushing away dirt to reveal a small, metal box half buried in the soil. "Good Lord, Poirot, what's this?" Poirot crouched, his gloved hands carefully lifting the box. It was locked, but the tarnished key from Ellen fit perfectly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded tightly, bearing Emily Arundell's elegant script. Poirot unfolded it, his eyes scanning the words with growing intensity. "It is a list," he said at last, his voice low. "Names, dates, sums of money, and at the bottom, a note. I fear the truth lies closer than I wish." Hastings peered over his shoulder, his breath catching. "It's a record of loans, isn't it? To Charles, Teresa, even Bellategno's. And look, there's a question mark next to Miss Lawson's name." Poirot nodded, folding the paper and tucking it into his pocket alongside the vial. "This, Hastings, is the heart of the matter. Money, fear, betrayal, and Bob, our silent witness, has led us to it." As they made their way back to the house, the stars beginning to prick the darkening sky, Poirot's voice was a soft murmur, almost lost in the rustle of leaves. "The plot thickens, mon ami. Tomorrow, we shall pull the threads tighter, and the truth, it will not hide from Hercule Poirot." Chapter 4. The dog's Alabitha. Morning sun draped little green house in a golden haze, its rays filtering through the ivy-clad windows of the drawing-room where Hercule Poirot sat, his small, precise hands folded over the head of his cane. The air carried the faint scent of beeswax polish and the lingering aroma of breakfast kippers, but Poirot's attention was fixed on the spirited wire-haired terrier at his feet. Bob, with his bright eyes and wagging tail, clutched a well-worn rubber ball in his jaws, dropping it with a soft thud before Poirot's polished shoes. The detective's lips twitched into a faint smile, his moustache quivering as he murmured, "Mon petit ami, you are more than a mere pet, are you not? A witness, perhaps 2 secrets unspoken." Captain Hastings, lounging in an armchair by the fireplace, looked up from his newspaper, his brow furrowed. "Really, Poirot, you're making a great deal out of that dog. He's charming, I'll grant you, but a witness. He's just a terrier with a fondness for chasing balls." Poirot's eyes gleamed with that familiar spark of intellectual mischief. "Ah, Hastings, you see a dog, but I see a creature of habit, of discipline. In such habits lie truths, mon ami. This Bob, he is no ordinary canine. He has a routine, a purpose, and I suspect he knows more of Mademoiselle Arundel's fate than any of us." Hastings chuckled, folding his paper. "You're suggesting Bob's going to solve this case for us? I say, that's a bit rich, even for you." Poirot raised a finger, his voice soft but commanding. "Patience, Hastings. The little grey cells, they work in concert with observation. And Bob, he is a study in observation. Come, let us test his habits." The detective rose, his movements deliberate, and gestured for Hastings to follow. Bob, sensing adventure, ahead, his ball bouncing along the parquet floor. They moved through the house, past the heavy oak staircase where Emily Arundell had taken her near-fatal tumble, and into the kitchen, where Ellen, the housekeeper, was scrubbing a copper pot. With vigorous determination, her apron was dusted with flour, and her grey hair was tucked neatly under a cap, though a few strands betrayed her morning's exertions. "Good morning, Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," Ellen said, pausing to wipe her hands on a cloth. Her voice was warm, but carried a trace of wariness, as if she sensed the detective's probing gaze. "Bob's been lively today. Always is when there's company." Poirot inclined his head, his tone courteous. "Madame Ellen, I wish to understand this admirable dog. You say he sleeps in the kitchen at night?" "Oh, aye, sir," Ellen replied, nodding toward a cushioned basket in the corner, where a faded blanket lay neatly folded. "Every night, regular as clockwork. Miss Emily was particular about it. Didn't want him roaming the house, tracking mud, or causing mischief. He's a good lad, though. Never leaves his ball on the stairs, no matter what Miss Lawson says." Poirot's eyes narrowed, though his smile remained polite. "Miss Lawson, she believes the ball caused Mademoiselle Arundel's fall." Lips tightened, and she glanced toward the door, as if ensuring they were alone. "That's what she said, sir, but I don't hold with it. Bob's too clever for that. He keeps his ball here or in the garden. I told Miss Emily as much when she mentioned it after her fall. She was shaken, poor dear, but she didn't blame Bob." "Most interesting," Poirot murmured, crouching to pat Bob's head. The dog wagged his tail furiously, dropping the ball again as if inviting play. "And this ball, it is always with him." "Always," Ellen confirmed. "He carries it everywhere, but he knows his place. Never leaves it where it shouldn't be. Poirot picked up the ball, turning it over in his hands. It was worn, its red rubber faded to a mottled pink, with tooth marks crisscrossing its surface. A loyal companion, this ball, he mused. Let us conduct a small experiment. Madame Ellen, may I borrow it for a moment? Ellen hesitated, then nodded. As you like, sir. Just don't keep it long. Bob gets fretful without it. Poirot slipped the ball into his pocket, ignoring Bob's plaintive whine. Come, Hastings, let us see how our friend reacts. They stepped into the garden, where the air was thick with the scent of roses and freshly cut grass. The lawn stretched toward a low stone wall, beyond which the countryside rolled in gentle hills dotted with grazing sheep. Bob trotted at Poirot's heels, his eyes fixed on the pocket where his treasure lay hidden. Poirot paused by a flower bed where marigolds blazed in orderly rows, and pretended to fumble, letting the ball roll. Beneath a shrub, Bob sprang into action, his nose to the ground, tail wagging like a metronome. Within moments, he emerged triumphant, the ball clamped in his jaws. He dropped it at Poirot's feet, barking sharply as if to say, "You cannot fool me, magnifique." Poirot exclaimed, clapping his hands. "You see, Hastings, this dog is no fool. He knows where his ball belongs. If it were left on the stairs, he would retrieve it. Nan." Hastings scratched his chin, beginning to see Poirot's point. "So you're saying the ball couldn't have been left there by accident? Someone placed it there deliberately?" Poirot said, his voice low. "But we must confirm. Let us return to the kitchen." Back inside, Poirot placed the ball in Bob's basket, then turned to Ellen. "Madame, if you please, lock the kitchen door tonight as usual. I wish to ensure Bob remains here, undisturbed." Ellen nodded, though her eyes betrayed curiosity. "As you say, sir, but why all this fuss over Bob?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Because, madame, the truth often hides in the simplest places." As they left the kitchen, Hastings couldn't resist a quip. "I say, Poirot, are you planning to interrogate the dog next? Perhaps he'll confess to the whole affair." Poirot chuckled, but his eyes were sharp. "Do not jest, Hastings. Bob has already told us much. Now, let us seek another witness, the village chemist." The walk to Market Basing's High Street was brisk, the summer air warm and alive with the hum of bees. The village was a postcard of rural England, thatched cottages, a stone church with a lopsided spire, and a green where children played cricket, with more enthusiasm than skill. The chemist's shop, a narrow building with a green-painted door, smelled of lavender and antiseptic. Behind the counter stood Mr. Pritchard, a wiry man with spectacles perched on his nose, his apron pristine despite the clutter of bottles and jars around him. "Good day, gentlemen," Mr. Pritchard said, peering over his glasses. "What can I do for you?" Poirot's manner was all charm. "Monsieur Pritchard, I am Hercule Poirot, a visitor to your charming village. I seek information about a purchase made some months ago, perhaps in April or May. A substance, shall we say, unusual." Mr. Pritchard's brow creased. "Unusual, you say? We sell all sorts here remedies for aches, tonics for the weary. Can you be more specific?" Poirot leaned closer, his voice conspiratorial. "A substance, perhaps, not meant for common use. Something a gentleman, possibly foreign, might have requested." The chemist's eyes widened, and he lowered his voice. "Well, now that you mention it, there was a fellow back in April, not from round here, mind, spoke with a bit of an accent, asked for a powder, said it was for scientific experiments. I sold him a small quantity of a chemical, nothing illegal, mind you, but not something we keep on the shelf. Had to order it special." Poirot's moustache twitched. "And this chemical, what was its nature?" Mr. Pritchard hesitated, glancing around as if the walls might eavesdrop. "It was a compound used in small doses for medical research, but I won't bore you with the details. He paid cash, didn't give a name, seemed in a hurry." "Most enlightening," Poirot said, his tone betraying nothing. "And this gentleman, you would recognize him?" "Perhaps," Mr. Pritchard said cautiously. "Tallish, dark hair, a bit of a nervous manner. That's all I recall." Poirot thanked him and stepped outside, where Hastings was waiting, fanning himself with his hat. "Well, Poirot, any luck?" "A thread, Hastings, a slender thread," Poirot replied, his eyes distant. "A foreign gentleman, a mysterious powder, and a dog who does not misplace his ball. The pieces, they begin to align." As they returned to Little Green House, The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawn. The house seemed to watch them, its windows glinting like eyes. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Miss Lawson was in the parlour, embroidering a cushion with trembling hands, while Charles Arundell lounged on the sofa, flipping through a motor magazine. Teresa, elegant in a silk dress, stood by the window, her expression distant. Poirot wasted no time. Mademoiselle Lawson, a word, if you please. You mentioned the ball on the stairs. Are you certain it was Bob's? Miss Lawson's needle paused, and her cheeks flushed. Well, I assumed it was. It looked like his. I found it after Miss Emily's fall, and she was so upset, saying it was dangerous. But you did not see it on the stairs before the fall? Poirot pressed. Her eyes darted to Charles, then back to Poirot. No, I didn't, but it must have been there. Bob's always carrying it about. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. He turned to Charles, who looked up with a lazy grin. And you, Monsieur Charles, where were you the night of your aunt's accident? Charles shrugged, tossing the magazine aside. In London, old boy. Had a bit of a flutter at the races. Lost more than I won, I'm afraid. A pity, Poirot said dryly. And you, Mademoiselle Teresa? Teresa turned, her eyes cool. I was here, with Aunt Emily. We played cards that evening. She was in good spirits, considering. Poirot's gaze lingered on her, but he said nothing more. As they left the parlour, Hastings whispered, You don't trust them, do you? Trust, Hastings, is a luxury I cannot afford, Poirot replied. But Bob, he trusts no one who does not belong. Observe. They found Bob in the garden, chasing a butterfly with joyous abandon. Poirot knelt, offering the ball, which Bob seized eagerly. Let us try another test, Poirot said. He led them to the staircase, placing the ball on a middle step. Bob bounded up, sniffed the ball, and carried it back to his basket in the kitchen, as if correcting a mistake. You see, Poirot said, his voice triumphant, he does not leave it where it does not belong. The ball on the stairs was no accident, Hastings. It was placed there, perhaps to mask a greater crime. That evening, as the household dined, the tension was palpable. Charles regaled them with tales of his water-speed record attempt, his voice loud and brash, while Teresa toyed with her food, her engagement ring glinting in the candlelight. Miss Lawson dropped her fork twice, her nerves betraying her. Poirot, ever observant, noted Dr. Tanios's absence, though Bella and her children were present, the children giggling as Bob performed tricks for scraps. After dinner, Hastings took Bob for a walk, hoping to clear his head. The night was cool, the stars sharp against the velvet sky. As they passed the garden shed, Bob growled, his hackles rising. Hastings, startled, peered into the darkness, but saw nothing. Easy, old boy, he said, patting the dog. What's got you spooked? Back at the house, Poirot was waiting in the library, a fire crackling in the grate. Hastings, what did you observe? Bob didn't like something near the shed, Hastings said. Growled, like he'd seen a ghost. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Not a ghost, mon ami, but a clue. Tomorrow, we shall investigate this shed. For now, let us reflect. The ball, the powder, the dogs, routine, they tell a story. And Bob, he is our silent narrator. As Hastings retired to bed, the house creaked around him, its shadows heavy with secrets. He couldn't shake the image of Bob's watchful eyes, nor Poirot's words. You, my friend, have told me much without speaking. The mystery was deepening, and Hastings felt the thrill of the chase, tempered by a growing unease. Who in this house was hiding the truth, and what lengths would they go to keep it buried? The narrative stretched on, each moment layered with suspense, as Poirot's relentless logic peeled back the layers of deception. Bob, the unassuming terrier, had become the linchpin of the investigation, his habits a beacon in the fog of lies. The chapter closed with the house settling into an uneasy silence, the promise of further revelations hanging in the air like the scent of rain before a storm. Chapter 5. The delayed letter. The morning sun cast long, golden fingers across the village of Market Basing, its light glinting off the dukest cobblestones as Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings stepped out of Little Green House. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and the faint tank of wood smoke from a distant chimney. Poirot, immaculate in his polished shoes and neatly pressed suit, adjusted his hat with a precise flick of his wrist. His mustache twitched, a silent signal of the restless thoughts churning within his little grey cells. Hastings, ever the contrast in his slightly rumpled tweed, strode beside him, his face a mixture of curiosity and mild exasperation. "Really, Poirot," Hastings began, his voice tinged with the familiar blend of admiration and skepticism. "Do you truly believe this delayed letter business is worth chasing? It could simply be a clerical error at the post office. These things happen, you know." Poirot's eyes gleamed with that peculiar intensity that Hastings had come to recognize as the prelude to a revelation. "Mon ami," he replied, his voice low and deliberate. "In the affairs of Hercule Poirot, there are no mere clerical errors. A letter, penned by a frightened woman, delayed for 2 months. Nan, this is no accident. It is a thread in the tapestry of a crime, and we shall tug at it until the pattern reveals itself." Their destination was the village post office, a quaint stone building nestled between a butcher's shop and a bakery, its red postbox standing like a sentinel at the corner. The mystery of Miss Emily Arundell's letter dated April 17, yet arriving in Poirot's hands on June 28, had gnawed at the detective since its discovery. Why had it taken so long to reach him? And why had Emily, now dead, felt compelled to write of a dog's ball and a sinister incident at Little Green House? The answers, Poirot was certain, lay in the mundane workings of this sleepy village's postal system. Inside the post office, the air was thick with the scent of ink and old paper. Behind the counter stood Mr. Purvis, a wiry man with spectacles, perched precariously on his nose, sorting letters with the precision of a metronome. He glanced up as Poirot and Hastings entered, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to guarded wariness. "Good morning, gentlemen," Purvis said, pushing his spectacles up. "What brings you here? Not often we see strangers poking about the post." Poirot offered a disarming smile, his eyes twinkling with calculated charm. "Monsieur Purvis, I am Hercule Poirot, and this is my associate, Captain Hastings. We are investigating a small matter concerning a letter sent from Little Green House. Perhaps you could assist us." Purvis's fingers paused over a stack of envelopes. "A letter, you say, from Miss Arundell's place? Well, I'll do what I can, but we handle a lot of post here." Poirot produced the envelope in question, its edges slightly worn, but the handwriting unmistakably that of Emily Arundell. "This letter," he said, placing it gently on the counter, "was posted on April 17th, yet it reached my hands only 2 days ago, on June 28th. Can you explain this delay, monsieur?" Purvis frowned, taking the envelope and turning it over in his hands. His brow furrowed as he studied the postmark. "April 17th, you say? That's peculiar. We don't hold letters here unless they're misaddressed, and this one's clear as day. To your flat in London, Mr. Poirot should have taken a day or 2 at most." "Indeed," Poirot murmured, his gaze sharpening, "and yet it did not. Tell me, who was responsible for the post in April? Was the delivery routine, or was there, perhaps, an irregularity?" Purvis hesitated, his fingers drumming lightly on the counter. "Well, now that you mention it, we did have a temporary postman back then. Fellow named Jenkins. Came in for a few weeks when our regular man, old Bill, took ill. Jenkins was a drifter, mind you, did his job well enough, but he up and vanished in early May. Never saw him again." Hastings leaned forward, his interest piqued. "Vanished? That's a bit dramatic, isn't it? People don't just disappear without a trace." Purvis shrugged, his eyes darting to the side. "Happens more than you'd think in a village like this. Folk come and go. Jenkins was a quiet sort, kept to himself. Didn't talk much, but he knew the routes. If there was a delay with your letter, could be he missed it or, well, I don't like to speak ill of anyone, but he might have been careless." Poirot's smile remained, but his eyes were now as sharp as a hawk's. "Careless, you say, or perhaps deliberate? Monsieur Purvis, do you keep records of your temporary staff? An address, perhaps, or a reference?" Purvis shook his head. "Not much to go on. Jenkins gave a lodging house in Basingstoke as his address, but when we sent his last wages, the letter came back nobody by that name there. Like I said, a drifter." Poirot nodded slowly, his fingers brushing the brim of his hat. "Most interesting. And tell me, did this Jenkins ever mention Little Green House or Miss Arundell?" "Not that I recall," Purvis replied, but his hesitation was noticeable though. "Now that you mention it, he did ask about the big houses in the area once or twice. Said he was curious about the old families. I thought nothing of it at the time." "Nothing, you say?" Poirot's voice was soft, almost a whisper. Yet everything, monsieur, is of consequence in a matter of life and death. Merci for your time. We shall return if further questions arise." As they stepped back into the sunlight, Hastings let out a low whistle. "Well, that's a lead, isn't it? A mysterious postman who vanishes just as Emily's letter goes missing. Sounds like something out of one of your detective novels, Poirot." "Perhaps," Poirot replied, his eyes distant as he scanned the village street, "but a novel, mon ami, is fiction. This is fact, and facts are stubborn things. This Jenkins, whether by accident or design, has played a role in our mystery. We must find him, or at least understand why he delayed Mademoiselle Arundell's cry for help." Their next stop was the village inn, the Red Lion, where Poirot hoped to glean gossip about the elusive Jenkins. The inn was a cozy, low-ceilinged establishment, its walls adorned with hunting trophies and faded photographs of local cricket teams. The landlord, a jovial man named Mr. Carter, greeted them with a hearty wave, his apron stained with the morning's work. "Welcome, gents," Carter boomed, wiping his hands on a rag. "What'll it be? A pint of our finest ale, or are you just passing through?" Poirot, ever the teetotaler, declined the ale with a polite shake of his head. "Monsieur Carter, I am Hercule Poirot, and this is Captain Hastings. We seek information about a man who worked briefly in your village, Tom Jenkins, a temporary postman. Did he ever frequent your establishment?" Carter's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Jenkins, he came in a few times. Quiet fellow, always sat in the corner, with a pint and a newspaper. Didn't mix much, but he paid his tab, so I had no complaints." "Did he ever speak of Little Green House?" Poirot asked, his tone casual but his eyes intent. Carter scratched his chin, his brow creasing. "Now that you mention it, he did ask about the Arundells once, wanted to know who lived there, what kind of folk they were. I told him Miss Emily was a proper lady, kept to herself mostly, but her nephew and niece were always causing a stir. He seemed interested, like he was fishing for something, didn't think much of it then." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sure sign of his mind at work. "And did this Jenkins ever mention where he came from, or where he was going?" "Not a word," Carter replied, shaking his head. "He was here one day, gone the next. Left his last tab, unpaid, mind you, shillings. Not the end of the world, but it rankled." Poirot thanked the landlord and led Hastings back to the street, where the village was now bustling with midday activity. A group of children played hopscotch near the church, their laughter mingling with the clatter of a passing cart. Poirot paused, his gaze fixed on the horizon, where Little Green House loomed like a silent sentinel. "This Jenkins," Poirot mused, "is either a pawn or a player in our little drama. But why delay the letter? To protect someone? To conceal a crime? Or perhaps to ensure Mademoiselle Arundel's voice was silenced before help could arrive?" Hastings frowned, his hands shoved into his pockets. But who would benefit from that? Charles and Teresa, maybe they stood to inherit, didn't they? Or Miss Lawson, with her new will. "Patience, mon ami," Poirot said, raising a finger. "The motives are many, but the method is what concerns us now. We return to Little Green House, for I believe the answers lie closer to home." The walk back was brisk, the countryside unfolding in a patchwork of green fields and hedgerows. Little Green House greeted them with its usual air of quiet menace, its ivy-clad walls seeming to whisper secrets. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Ellen, the housekeeper, was polishing silver in the dining room, her movements brisk and purposeful. Bob, the wire-haired terrier, bounded toward them, his tail wagging like a metronome. "Bonjour, Monsieur Bob," Poirot said, bending to pat the dog's head. "You, I think, know more than you can tell." Ellen looked up, her face softening at the sight of Bob. "He's a good lad, that one. Never far from Miss Emily's side, he wasn't. Broke his heart when she passed." Poirot nodded, his eyes scanning the room. "Madame Ellen, tell me, did a postman perhaps, a new one, ever call at Little Green House in April?" Ellen paused, her cloth stilling on a candlestick. "Now that you mention it, there was a new fellow, youngish, with a scruffy beard. Didn't say much, just handed over the letters and went on his way. Miss Emily remarked on it once, said he seemed shifty, not like old Bill." "Shifty, you say?" Poirot's voice was soft, but his eyes were alight. "And did this man ever linger, perhaps ask questions about the household?" Ellen frowned, her hands resuming their work. "Can't say he did, but Miss Emily was particular about her post. She'd check it every morning, like clockwork." If that letter you're on about was delayed, she'd have noticed it wasn't sent. When she thought, Poirot's gaze sharpened, and yet, it was not sent. Most curious. Merci, Madame Ellen. You have been most helpful. As Ellen returned to her polishing, Poirot led Hastings to the drawing-room, where Dr. Jacob Tanios was reading a newspaper, his spectacles perched low on his nose. Tanios, the husband of Emily's niece Bella, was a slight man with a nervous energy that seemed to hum beneath his calm exterior. His dark eyes flicked up as Poirot and Hastings entered, and he folded the newspaper with deliberate care. Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings, Tanios said, his voice accented with a faint Mediterranean lilt. To what do I owe this visit? Poirot settled into an armchair, his posture as precise as a metronome. Monsieur Tanios, I am investigating a matter concerning a letter sent by Mademoiselle Arundell. You were in Market Basing in April, were you? Not. Tanios's fingers tightened on the newspaper, a fleeting gesture that did not escape Poirot's notice. April. Yes, I believe I was here briefly. Bella and the children were visiting Emily, and I joined them for a few days. Why do you ask? This letter, Poirot said, producing the envelope once more, was posted on April 17th, yet it did not reach me until June 28th. During your time here, did you notice anything unusual about the post? A new postman, perhaps? Tanios' eyes flickered, and he adjusted his spectacles. The post, I don't pay much attention to such things. I was preoccupied with family matters, Milly's health, you know. She was frail even then. Frail, yes, Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild. And yet, she wrote to me of a sinister incident, one she feared might threaten her life. Did she speak to you of such fears? Tanios shook his head, his expression carefully neutral. Emily was fanciful at times. She spoke of odd things, spiritualism, premonitions. I thought it was her age, nothing more. Hastings, leaning against the mantelpiece, raised an eyebrow. Fanciful. She seemed sharp as a tack to me, from what Ellen says, not the sort to imagine threats where there were none. Tanios's smile was tight. Perhaps, but I assure you, Mr. Poirot, I know nothing of any letter or postman. My concern was for my wife and children, not village gossip. Poirot nodded, his eyes never leaving Tanios's face. Of course, monsieur, but the mind of Hercule Poirot is like a civet, catches even the smallest grain of truth. We shall speak again. As Tanios excused himself, claiming a need to check on his children, Poirot turned to Hastings, his expression grave. That man, mon ami, is hiding something. His answers are too smooth, his manner too controlled. We must watch him closely. The afternoon brought an unexpected discovery. While exploring the upper floor of Little Green House, Hastings stumbled upon a small, locked room tucked behind the main staircase. The door was unremarkable, its paint chipped and faded, but a faint scratch mark near the lock caught his eye. He called for Poirot, who arrived with Bob trotting at his heels. Look at this, Poirot, Hastings said, pointing to the scratch. Someone's been at this lock recently, I'd wager. Poirot knelt, his magnifying glass glinting in the dim light. Most intriguing, Hastings. The mark is fresh, and the lock, it has been tampered with. But by whom, and for what purpose? With Ellen's permission, they retrieved a spare key from the housekeeper's ring. The door creaked open, revealing a cluttered storage room filled with old furniture, dusty books, and a small writing desk. On the desk lay a photograph, half hidden beneath a pile of papers. Hastings lifted it, his breath catching as he studied. The image, Emily Arundell, seated at a table with a Ouija board, her expression one of intense concentration. Beside her sat Miss Lawson, her eyes wide with what could have been fear or excitement. Good Lord, Poirot, Hastings said, passing him the photograph. Emily was dabbling in spiritualism. That's a bit out of character, isn't it? Poirot's eyes gleamed as he studied the image. Out of character perhaps, but not without significance. The Ouija board, mon ami, is a tool for those seeking answers or hiding them. This photograph tells us that Mademoiselle Arundell was not only fearful but curious, perhaps desperate to understand the threat she sensed. As they sifted through the desk, Poirot found a small notebook, its pages filled with Emily's neat handwriting. The entries were cryptic, filled with references to the board and messages from beyond. One passage, dated April 15th, stood out. The board speaks of danger on the stairs. I must write to Poirot, but who can I trust to send it? Poirot closed the notebook, his expression somber. She knew, Hastings, She knew someone in this house was her enemy, and she feared her letter would not reach me. The delay was no accident, was sabotaged, designed to ensure her cry for help went unheard. The day drew to a close with Poirot and Hastings standing on the lawn of Little Green House, the setting sun casting long shadows across the grass. Bob lay at their feet, his ball clutched in his jaws, his eyes fixed on Poirot as if sensing the weight of the moment. "This house," Poirot said, his voice low, "is a stage, and we are unraveling its drama. The letter, the postman, the Ouija board all are pieces of a puzzle. But the picture is not yet complete. Tomorrow we shall dig deeper, for the truth is close, mon ami." Hastings nodded, his gaze drifting to the darkened windows of Little Green House. "And Bob, what's his role in all this?" Poirot smiled, patting the dog's head. "He is our silent witness, Hastings, and soon he will lead us to the heart of this mystery." As the stars began to speckle the night sky, Poirot's words hung in the air, a promise of revelations yet to come. The delayed letter was no mere oversight, it was a calculated act, a thread in a web of deceit that Poirot was determined to unravel. And with Bob's unwavering loyalty and Poirot's relentless logic, the truth could not remain hidden for long. Chapter 6. The green mist. The sun hung low over the rolling hills of Market Basing, casting a golden sheen across the village as Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings strolled toward the annual fete. The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass, mingled with the sugary aroma of candy floss and the faint tang of lemonade stands. Laughter and the lively strains of a fiddler's tune drifted from the village green, where colorful stalls lined the perimeter, adorned with bunting that fluttered in the gentle breeze. To an outsider, it was a scene of idyllic charm, but Poirot's keen eyes scanned the crowd, searching for the undercurrents of tension that simmered beneath the festive facade. "Mon ami," Poirot said, adjusting his immaculate straw hat, "a village fete is like a stage. Everyone plays their part, but the true drama unfolds in the wings." His voice, though soft, carried a weight that made Hastings glance at him, intrigued. "You think we'll uncover something here?" Hastings asked, his tone hopeful yet tinged with skepticism. He tugged at his tweed jacket, feeling slightly out of place among the villagers in their summer frocks and straw boaters. Poirot's mustache twitched. "The human heart, Hastings, reveals itself in moments of unguarded joy or careless chatter. Here, among the games and laughter, we shall find the threads of our mystery." They approached the green, where children darted between stalls, clutching paper cones of sweets, and adults mingled in clusters, their conversations punctuated by bursts of laughter. A banner strung across two ancient oaks proclaimed, "Market Basing Fete, 1936. Its bold red letters faded slightly from the sun. Poirot's gaze lingered on the banner, then shifted to the crowd, where he spotted the familiar figures of Little Green House's inhabitants. Bella Tanios stood near a hoopla stall, her two children, Edward and Mary, tugging at her skirts as they begged for another turn. Her face, framed by a simple cotton bonnet, was drawn, her eyes darting nervously as if expecting an unseen threat. Nearby, her husband, Dr. Jacob Tanios, leaned against a wooden post, his arms crossed, and his expression unreadable. His dark suit seemed out of place in the summery throng, and Poirot noted the way his fingers twitched, as if impatient for something or someone. "There's our cast," Hastings murmured, nodding toward the Tanios family. "Bella looks like she hasn't slept in days." "Precisement," Poirot replied, "and Dr. Tanios, his stillness is that of a man who watches too closely. Come, let us observe." They wove through the crowd, pausing at a stall where Miss Wilhelmina Lawson, Emily Arundell's companion, was examining a tray of homemade jams. Her nervous hands fluttered over the jars, and her spectacles slipped down her nose as she muttered to herself about raspberry versus gooseberry. Poirot approached, his smile disarming. "Mademoiselle Lawson," he greeted, tipping his hat. "You were enjoying the fete?" Miss Lawson started, nearly dropping a jar. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, you startled me." "Yes, it's charming, isn't it? So much life." Her voice trembled, and her eyes flickered toward Bella Tanios, who was now coaxing Edward away from a toffee apple stall. Poirot's tone remained light, but his eyes were sharp. "Indeed, and yet, I sense a certain unease in you. Perhaps you are troubled by the events at Little Green House." Miss Lawson's lips parted, then closed. She clutched the jar tightly. I don't know what you mean." "Miss Emily's death was a shock, of course. but it was natural. Dr. Granger said so. Natural, perhaps, Poirot said, his voice smooth as velvet. But the circumstances, they are not so clear. Tell me, mademoiselle, did you ever notice anything unusual in the days before her passing? A visitor, perhaps, or an item out of place? Miss Lawson's face paled, and she glanced around, as if fearing eavesdropper's eye. Well, there was the séance, you know. Miss Emily was fond of spiritualism, and the Tripp sisters, they're such enthusiasts, held one a week before her death. It was unsettling. Hastings raised an eyebrow. A séance? You mean table-turning and all that nonsense? It was not nonsense. Miss Lawson snapped, then softened, her cheeks flushing. I mean, it was strange. The spirits spoke of darkness on the stairs. I didn't think much of it at the time, but after Miss Emily's fall, her voice trailed off, and she looked away, clutching the jam jar like a lifeline. Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. Darkness on the stairs, you say? Most intriguing. And who was present at this séance? Just the Tripp sisters, myself, and Miss Emily. Oh, and Bella was there, though she left early. She said it made her uncomfortable. Miss Lawson hesitated, then added in a rush, but it was all harmless, surely. Just a bit of fun. Fun, Poirot repeated, his tone neutral but his gaze piercing. Merci, mademoiselle, you have it been most helpful. As they moved away, Hastings whispered, do you think she's hiding something? She's jumpy as a cat. Undoubtedly, Poirot replied, but whether it is guilt or fear, I cannot yet say. Let us seek out Dr. Granger. His observations may illuminate this green mist he mentioned. They found Dr. Granger near the coconut shy, his weathered face creased with amusement as he watched a group of boys hurl wooden balls with more enthusiasm than accuracy. The elderly physician, with his silver hair and stooped posture, exuded a quiet authority, and his eyes lit up at Poirot's approach. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, he greeted, shaking their hands. Come to try your luck at the coconuts. Perhaps, later, Poirot said with a smile. For now, I wish to discuss Mademoiselle Arundel's passing. You mentioned a curious detail, green pallor on her skin. Can you elaborate? Dr. Granger's expression grew somber. I did notice it. Odd thing, that I put her death down to liver failure. Her health had been declining for months, but the green tint was peculiar. I've seen it once, or twice before, mind you, in cases of poisoning. Arsenic, perhaps, or something less common. But there was no evidence of foul play, and her symptoms matched liver disease, so I didn't pursue it. Poirot's mustache quivered slightly, a sign of his heightened interest. Poisoning, you say? And yet, no tests were conducted to confirm this. Granger sighed, rubbing his chin. No, I'm afraid not. The family accepted it as natural, and there was no call for a post-mortem. Besides, Miss Emily was stubborn. She refused hospital treatment, said she'd rather die at home with Bob by her side. Bob, Poirot mused, his eyes drifting to the wire-haired terrier, who was now romping with Edward and Mary near a ring-toss game. The dog, he was close to her. Devoted Granger said, slept by her bed every night after the fall. Wouldn't let anyone near her room without a fuss, except Ellen and Miss Lawson. Most interesting, Poirot said, his voice soft but laden with meaning. Merci, doctor, you have given me much to ponder. As they left Granger, Hastings frowned. Poisoning, Poirot. That's a grim thought. But if it was poison, how was it administered, and by whom? All in good time, mon ami, Poirot replied, his gaze fixed on the Tenios family. First, let us enjoy the fete. Observation is as valuable as interrogation. The afternoon wore on, the fete growing livelier as the sun dipped lower. Poirot and Hastings wandered among the stalls, sampling scones slathered with clotted cream and watching a tug-of-war that drew raucous cheers. Yet Poirot's attention remained on the little green house party. He noted how Bella avoided her husband, her shoulders tense whenever he approached. Dr. Tenios, meanwhile, seemed to orbit the family, his eyes following Bella and the children, with an intensity that bordered on predatory. At a fortune-teller's tent, draped in gaudy silks, Poirot paused, intrigued by the queue of villagers, eager for glimpses of their futures. The Tripp sisters, Agnes and Isabel, emerged from the tent, their faces alight with excitement. Agnes, the elder, spotted Poirot and waved him over. Monsieur Poirot, she called, her voice carrying a theatrical flourish. You must have your fortune told. Madame Zorena is simply marvelous. Poirot's lips curved into a polite smile. I prefer, madame, to uncover truths through reason rather than mysticism. But tell me, you mentioned a séance at Little Green House. What exactly transpired? Isabel, her eyes wide behind round spectacles, leaned in. Oh, it was extraordinary. The spirits were restless that night. We used a Ouija board, you see, and the messages were so clear. Danger, they spelled out, and then stairs. We thought it was a warning for Miss Emily, but she laughed it off, said it was just Bob being clumsy with his ball. And yet, Poirot said, she wrote to me of her concerns. Did she speak of this danger afterward? The sisters exchanged a glance. Agnes lowered her voice. She did, actually. A few days later, she asked us if we thought someone could tamper with a séance. She was worried someone had manipulated the board to frighten her. Manipulated? Hastings interjected, his brow furrowing. You mean, faked the messages? Possibly, Agnes said. But we assured her it was genuine. The spirits don't lie, you know. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. And who else was present to witness these truthful spirits? Just us, Miss Lawson, and Miss Emily, Isabel said. Bella was there for a bit, but she left when the board started spelling things. Said it gave her the creeps. Mercy, Poirot said, tipping his hat. You have been most illuminating. As the sisters bustled off to the cake stall, Hastings shook his head. Spiritualism, poison, and a dog's ball. This case is getting stranger by the minute. Strange, yes, Poirot said, but the pieces are beginning to align. Come, let us return to Little Green House. I wish to examine Mademoiselle Arundell's bedroom. The walk back to Little Green House was quiet, the Fates' music fading into the distance as the countryside enveloped them. The estate loomed ahead, its ivy-clad walls casting long shadows in the evening light. Inside, the house was still, save for the soft patter of Bob's paws as he greeted them at the door. His rubber ball clutched proudly in his jaws. Ellen, the housekeeper, led them to Emily's bedroom, a spacious chamber with heavy oak furniture and a four-poster bed draped in faded velvet. The air carried a faint musty scent, tinged with something sharper chemical. Perhaps. Poirot's eyes roamed the room, lingering on the bedside table, where a glass and a carafe of water stood untouched since Emily's death. Ellen said, his tone gentle. Did Mademoiselle Arundell take any medicines regularly? Only what Dr. Granger prescribed, Ellen replied, her hands twisting in her apron. A tonic for her liver, and some sleeping draughts toward the end. Miss Lawson brought them up each night. Poirot nodded, his fingers brushing the carafe. He lifted the glass, sniffing it carefully, then set it down with a thoughtful hum. Moving to the dresser, he opened drawers with meticulous care, finding nothing but neatly folded linens and a few trinkets. But under the bed, half hidden by the dust ruffle, he spotted a small corked vial, its contents a faint greenish powder. Hastings, Poirot said, holding up the vial. Do you recall the powder I found in the garden shed? Hastings nodded, his eyes widening. The same stuff. Perhaps, Poirot said, slipping the vial into his pocket. We shall have it analyzed. But I suspect it is no coincidence that this green mist appears in both places. As they descended the staircase, Bob trotted alongside, his ball bouncing with each step. Poirot paused at the spot where Emily had fallen, his fingers tracing the polished wood of the banister. This staircase, he murmured, it holds the key. The fall was no accident, and the poison, it was the final stroke. They reached the drawing room, where Miss Lawson was arranging flowers, her hands trembling slightly. She looked up, startled, as Poirot entered. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice high, I didn't expect you back so soon. I find, Mademoiselle Poirot said, that the truth often reveals itself when least expected. Tell me, did you ever notice a peculiar odor in this house? Something chemical, perhaps? Miss Lawson's face drained of color. I don't know what you mean. This is an old house. It smells of polish and dust. That's all. Poirot's smile was almost pitying. You are nervous, mademoiselle, and yet, I believe you wish to help. Tell me about the séance. The darkness on the stairs. Did it frighten you? She hesitated, then nodded. It did. I thought it was just the Tripp sisters' theatrics. But after Miss Emily's fall, I wondered. She was so sure someone had tampered with the stairs. She even asked me to check Bob's ball, to make sure it wasn't left out. And was it? Poirot asked, his voice soft but insistent. No, Miss Lawson said, her eyes filling with tears. Bob's ball was in the kitchen, where it always is. I told her so, but she was so frail by then, so confused. Poirot placed a hand on her arm, his touch gentle but firm. "You have done well to tell me this. Rest now, mademoiselle. The truth is near." As they stepped outside, the twilight had deepened, casting Little Green House in a soft purple glow. Hastings shivered, though the air was warm. "Poison, séances, and a rigged staircase," he said. "This is no simple family squabble, Poirot." "No," Poirot agreed, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "The killer is close, Hastings, and their poison lingers. But fear not, we shall unmask them soon." Bob barked, dropping his ball at Poirot's feet, and the detective chuckled softly. "Patience, mon petit ami," he said, patting the dog's head. "You have already told me much. Tomorrow we shall hear the rest." Chapter 7. A Wolf in the Manger. The morning sun spilled through the tall windows of Little Green House, casting dappled patterns across the oak-panelled dining room where Hercule Poirot sat, his small hands folded neatly over a cup of steaming tea. The air was thick with the scent of toast and the faint, lingering musk of old wood, but Poirot's mind was elsewhere, dissecting the tangled threads of the mystery at hand. Captain Hastings, seated opposite, buttered a slice of toast with rather more vigor than necessary, his brow furrowed as he recounted the previous night's discoveries. "Poirot," Hastings began, his voice low to avoid the ears of Ellen, the housekeeper, who bustled in the kitchen nearby. "This business with the vial of powder you found in the shed, it's positively sinister. Do you really think someone in this house poisoned Miss Arundell?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a subtle signal of his amusement at Hastings's earnestness. "Mon ami, the evidence does not lie, but it whispers. The powder, the fall, the delayed letter, all are pieces of a puzzle, and yet the most eloquent witness remains silent." His eyes drifted to the corner of the room, where Bob, the wire-haired terrier, lay curled on a faded rug, his ears twitching as if attuned to secrets no human could hear. Hastings followed Poirot's gaze, his expression softening. "You mean Bob? He's a fine dog, but I don't see how he's going to unravel this mess. He's not exactly barking out confessions." "Patience, Hastings," Poirot replied, his voice smooth as polished marble. "The little grey cells, they work in harmony with observation. Bob has already told us much: his habits, his loyalty, his unease. Today, we shall listen more closely." The dining room door creaked open, and Miss Lawson entered. Her thin frame swathed in a shapeless cardigan that seemed to swallow her. Her eyes darted nervously, as though expecting an ambush. "Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings," she said, her voice high and tremulous. "I hope you slept well. It's such a shame you've come all this way for nothing. Poor Emily's death was a tragedy, but surely it was just her time." Poirot's smile was as enigmatic as a sphinx. "Mademoiselle Lawson, the tragedy is not that Mademoiselle Arundell died, but that someone may have hastened her departure. Tell me, did you ever notice anything unusual about her behavior in the weeks before her fall?" Miss Lawson's fingers twisted the hem of her cardigan. "Unusual? Oh no, she was quite herself. A bit frail, perhaps, but sharp as ever. She did mention the dog's ball on the stairs, though thought it careless of Bob to leave it there, but that was all careless." Poirot's tone was mild, but his eyes gleamed with intensity. "Yet Ellen assures me Bob is meticulous in his habits." "Curious, Nan." Miss Lawson flushed, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Well, I suppose accidents happen. Dogs, you know, they're not always predictable." Poirot said nothing, merely sipped his tisane, but the silence was heavy with implication. Hastings, sensing the tension, cleared his throat. "Miss Lawson, did Miss Arundell ever express concerns about her family? Charles, Teresa, or perhaps Bella?" The companion's lips tightened. "Emily was protective of her fortune. Charles, bless him, was always asking for loans, something about that boat of his, always breaking records and breaking banks. And Teresa, well, she's a modern girl, isn't she? Emily didn't approve of her engagement to Dr. Donaldson, said he was too cold, too calculating. As for Bella," Miss Lawson hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Emily worried about her, said Bella was under her husband's thumb, Dr. Tanios, you know. Not a kind man, I think." Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. "Not kind. An interesting observation. Did Mademoiselle Arundell ever fear for her safety?" Miss Lawson's hands stilled, her eyes wide. "Fear? Oh heavens, no. Well, perhaps, after the fall, she was a bit shaken. Said something about not trusting those closest to her, but it was just nerves. Surely, perhaps," Poirot murmured, but his tone suggested otherwise. He rose, brushing invisible crumbs from his immaculate suit. "Merci, Mademoiselle Lawson. You have been most helpful. Hastings, shall we take a turn in the garden? The air, it clears the mind." As they stepped into the crisp morning, the garden of Little Green House unfolded before them like a painting, roses in full bloom, their petals heavy with dew, and a gravel path winding toward a weathered shed. Bob trotted at their heels, his tail wagging like a metronome. Hastings, pulling his coat tighter against the chill, glanced at Poirot. "You're onto something, aren't you? That business about Bella and Dr. Tanios, what do you make of it?" Poirot paused by a rosebush, his fingers brushing a velvety petal. "Dr. Tanios is a man of mystery, Hastings a physician, yet his demeanor is not that of a healer. Nervous, evasive, and absent when questions are asked. And Bella, her fear is palpable, yet she guards her tongue. There is a secret here, mon ami, and I suspect it lies at the heart of our puzzle." They reached the shed, its door ajar, the interior dim and cluttered with gardening tools. Poirot's eyes scanned the shelves, lingering on the spot where he had found the vial of powder 2 nights prior. "This shed," he said softly, "is a place of concealment. The powder was no accident, it is a clue, but to what?" Hastings frowned, kicking at a clod of earth. "Poison, you think, but who would have access to such a thing? Charles, with his debts, Teresa perhaps, to secure her inheritance, or—" He hesitated, glancing at Bob, who sniffed the ground near the shed. "You don't think Dr. T could be involved, do you?" Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "All are possible, Hastings, until the little grey cells eliminate the impossible. Come, let us visit the village. There are others who may have seen what Bob cannot tell us." The village of Market Basing was a postcard of rural England, its cobbled streets lined with thatched cottages and a bustling market square. Poirot and Hastings made their way to the home of the Tripp sisters, 2 elderly eccentrics known for their keen observation and penchant for gossip. The sisters' cottage was a riot of colourless curtains, chintz, cushions, and a profusion of potted plants that seemed to crowd every surface. Miss Isabel Tripp, the elder, greeted them with a theatrical flourish, her silver hair piled high, in a bun. "Mr. Poirot and Captain Hastings. Oh, what a delight. We've heard of your sleuthing, haven't we, Julia? Come, sit. Have some elderflower cordial." Miss Julia, smaller and more reserved, nodded vigorously. "Such a tragedy about dear Emily. We were just saying, weren't we, Isabel, that something wasn't right at Little Green House?" Poirot accepted a glass of cordial, his eyes sharp. "Mademoiselles, you are known for your attentiveness to the village's affairs. Tell me, did you notice anything unusual at Little Green House in the weeks before Mademoiselle Arundel's fall?" Isabel leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Oh, Mr. Poirot, we did. The night of Emily's fall, April 16th, wasn't it? I was out tending my roses, late, you know, because of the full moon, and I saw a shadowy figure near the house, skulking by the garden gate. Not one of the family, I'd wager. Too tall, too furtive." Julia nodded, her hands clasped. "And the next day, Emily was so pale, so shaken. We called on her, and she barely spoke, just kept petting Bob and muttering about accidents. I said to Isabel, didn't I, that something wicked was afoot?" Poirot's fingers steepled, his expression unreadable. "A shadowy figure, you say? Did you see this person's face, or perhaps their clothing?" Isabel sighed dramatically. "Alas, no. The moonlight played tricks, and here she's away before I could get a proper look. But I'd swear it was no one from the village. A stranger, perhaps, or someone who wished to seem so," Poirot murmured. He set down his glass, rising with a courteous bow. "Madame, you have given me much to ponder. Merci." As they left the cottage, Hastings's face was alight with excitement. "A shadowy figure, Poirot. This could be the break we need. Someone sneaking about, setting a trap for Miss Arundell perhaps. The same person who delayed her letter." Poirot's pace was brisk, his cane tapping the cobbles. "Possibly, Hastings. But we must not leap to conclusions. The figure may be a clue, or it may be a distraction. Let us return to Little Green House. I wish to examine the staircase once more." The afternoon sun bathed Little Green House in a golden glow as Poirot and Hastings re-entered, Bob bounding to greet them. The grand staircase loomed ahead, its polished banister gleaming, yet its steps held a darker secret. Poirot knelt, his magnifying glass in hand, inspecting each tread. With the precision of a watchmaker, Hastings watched, puzzled, as Poirot paused at the third step from the top, his fingers tracing a small, nearly invisible hole in the wood. "Regard us, Hastings," Poirot said, his voice low and intense. "A nail hole, perfectly placed. Not a splinter, not a flaw, but a deliberate mark. Something was fastened here perhaps, a wire, thin and deadly, to trip an unsuspecting foot." Hastings's eyes widened. "A tripwire? Good heavens, Poirot, you mean someone rigged the stairs to make Emily fall? That's diabolical." "Diabolical, yes," Poirot agreed, straightening. "And clever. The ball, blamed on poor Bob, was a convenient excuse. But who would have the knowledge, the opportunity, to set such a trap?" Before Hastings could reply, a soft bark drew their attention. Bob stood at the foot of the stairs, his ears pricked, his gaze fixed on the front door. The door swung open, revealing Dr. Jacob Tanyos, his face pale and his coat rumpled, as though he had travelled in haste. His eyes flickered with unease as he spotted Poirot and Hastings. "Mr. Poirot," Tanyos said, his voice strained, "I heard you were here, asking questions. I thought I should come. Bella's terribly upset, you know, about her aunt's death." Poirot's smile was polite, but his eyes were cold. "Dr. Tanyos, how fortunate. I was just about to seek you out. Tell me, where were you on the night of April 16th, when Mademoiselle Arundell fell?" Tanyos's hands twitched, and he shoved them into his pockets. "April 16th. I was in London, consulting with colleagues. Why do you ask?" "Curiosity, merely," Poirot said, his tone deceptively light. "And yet, I wonder, a man of your profession, surely you know the dangers of a fall for a woman of Mademoiselle Arundell's age. Did you ever discuss such risks with her?" Tanyos's jaw tightened. "I'm a doctor, Mr. Poirot, not a nursemaid." Emily was stubborn, refused advice. If she fell, it was her own carelessness or, perhaps, that dog's. He glanced at Bob, who growled softly, his hackles rising. Hastings bristled, stepping forward. "Now, see here, Tanyos, Bob's been cleared of that nonsense. He doesn't leave his ball on the stairs. Someone else caused that fall, and you seem awfully nervous about it." Tanyos's eyes darted to the staircase, then back to Poirot. "Nervous? I'm grieving, that's all. Emily was family. I'll not stand here and be accused." He stopped, his voice breaking, and turned abruptly, striding toward the drawing room. Poirot watched him go, his expression thoughtful. "Observe, Hastings, the good doctor is a man under pressure, and Bob did, you see how he reacted. The dog's instincts guide us to the truth." Hastings knelt beside Bob, scratching his ears. "You're a clever chap, aren't you? If only you could talk, old boy." Bob's tail thumped, but his eyes remained fixed on the drawing-room door, where Tanyos had disappeared. The air seemed too thickened with unspoken secrets, and Poirot's gaze was distant, his mind weaving connections only he could see. That evening, the atmosphere at Little Green House was taut as a bowstring. Dinner was a strained affair, with Charles Arundell regaling the table with tales of his water-speed record attempts, his charm masking a desperate edge. Teresa, resplendent in a silk dress, toyed with her food, her eyes flicking to Dr. Donaldson, who sat stiffly, his conversation limited to medical platitudes. Bella Tanyos, pale and quiet, barely spoke, her hands trembling as she cut her meat. Dr. Tanyos, seated beside her, maintained a facade of calm, but his fingers drummed restlessly. On the table, Poirot, ever the observer, noted every glance, every pause. As dessert was served at tart, lemon syllabub, he leaned toward Bella, his voice gentle. "Madame Tanyos, you seem troubled. Did Mademoiselle Arundell ever share her fears with you, perhaps about her fall?" Bella's fork clattered to her plate, drawing every eye. Fears? Aunt Emily was shaken. Yes, she thought someone meant her harm. She mentioned Charles, how he was always after her money. I told her it was nonsense, but her voice faltered, and she glanced at her husband, who stared at her with an intensity that made Hastings's skin prickle. "Enough," Bella Tanyos said sharply. "You're upsetting yourself. Emily's death was a tragedy, nothing more." Poirot's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, merely sipped his coffee. After dinner, as the household dispersed, he drew Hastings aside in the library, where the fire cast flickering shadows on the walls. "Hastings," Poirot said, his voice low, "we are close to the truth, but the path is treacherous. Bella knows more than she says, and Tanyos guards her silence. The tripwire, the powder, the delayed letter all point to a plan, meticulous and cruel. But we must be certain. Tomorrow we shall speak with Charles and Teresa, and perhaps Bob will guide us further." Hastings nodded, his heart pounding with the thrill of the chase. "You think Tanios is our man, don't you?" The way Bob growled at him, it's as if the dog knows something. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "The dog, mon ami, is our silent witness, and tomorrow, I believe, he will speak louder still." As they retired for the night, the house settled into an uneasy quiet, broken only by the distant bark of Bob, standing guard in the kitchen. Outside, the moon hung low, casting shadows that seemed to dance with secrets, waiting for Poirot's grey cells to unravel them. Chapter 8. The tangled web. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Little Green House, casting long dappled shadows across the oak-panelled dining room. Hercule Poirot sat at the head of the table, his small, immaculate frame a stark contrast to the grandeur of the room. His breakfast, a single boiled egg, a slice of toast, and a cup of steaming café au lait was arranged with geometric precision on the plate before him. Captain Hastings, seated to his right, attacked his bacon and eggs with rather less finesse, his fork clattering against the china as he recounted the previous day's discoveries. "Poirot," Hastings began, his voice tinged with exasperation, "I simply don't see how you can be so calm. That vial of powder, the delayed letter, Bob's peculiar behavior, it's all a jumble. Surely you must have some theory by now." Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Mon ami, the jumble, as you call it, is merely the raw material of the truth. The little grey cells, they are at work, sorting, arranging, untangling the web. Patience, Hastings, all will become clear." Before Hastings could protest, the dining room door swung open with a creak, admitting Charles Arundell. The young man's tailored suit was slightly rumpled, his blonde hair disheveled as though he'd run his hands through it one too many times. His charm, usually as polished as his cufflinks, seemed strained, his blue eyes darting nervously between Poirot and Hastings. "Good morning, gentlemen," Charles said, forcing a grin. "I trust you slept well, though I dare say Little Green House isn't exactly the Ritz." Poirot inclined his head, his eyes sharp. "The accommodations are most satisfactory, Monsieur Arundell. But tell me, how do you fare this morning? You seem preoccupied." Charles laughed, a brittle sound, and dropped into a chair. "Preoccupied? Hardly. Just the usual family nonsense. You know how it is, money, expectations, all that rot." He reached for a piece of toast, then seemed to think better of it, his hand hovering uncertainly. Poirot's gaze did not waver. "Money, you say? A most interesting subject. Perhaps you would care to elaborate." The air in the room grew taut, the clink of Hastings' fork against his plate suddenly loud in the silence. Charles shifted in his seat, his grin faltering. "Nothing to elaborate on, really, just the usual complaints. Aunt Emily was particular about her fortune, you know, always dangling it over our heads like a carrot, or a stick." Poirot murmured, his tone deceptively mild. "And you, Monsieur Charles, did you find her particularity burdensome?" Charles's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, the door opened again, this time admitting Teresa Arundell. Her entrance was nothing short of theatrical, a vision in a silk dress the colour of ripe plums. Her dark hair swept into an elegant chignon. She carried herself with the confidence of a woman accustomed to being admired, yet her expression was stormy, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Charles, you're incorrigible," she snapped, her voice cutting through the room like a whip. "Talking about Aunt Emily's money again. Have you no shame?" Charles leaned back in his chair, his grin returning, though it was sharper now, almost predatory. "Oh, come off it, Teresa. Don't act as if you weren't counting the pounds yourself. You and that doctor of yours, Donaldson, isn't it? I bet he's got plans for Aunt Emily's cash, too." Teresa's cheeks flushed, and she strode to the table, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "Leave Rex out of this," she said, her voice low but venomous. "You're the one who was always borrowing from her, Charles. Always with your schemes, motorboats, investments, that ridiculous water-speed record nonsense. How much did you owe her when she died?" Poirot's eyes gleamed, his fingers steepled before him. "A most fascinating exchange," he said softly. "It seems, Mademoiselle Teresa, Monsieur Charles, that the question of Madame Arundel's fortune is a thread that runs through this household. Perhaps one of you would care to enlighten me. How much, precisely, did you borrow, Monsieur?" Charles. Charles's grin vanished entirely. He pushed back his chair, the legs scraping against the floor. "This is absurd," he muttered. "I don't have to sit here and be interrogated by some foreign detective." He stood, tossing his napkin onto the table, and stormed out, the door slamming behind him. Teresa watched him go, her expression a mix of triumph and unease. She turned to Poirot, her chin lifted defiantly. "He's hiding something," she said. "He always is. Charles has never been able to manage his money or his temper." Poirot nodded, his face unreadable. "And you, mademoiselle, are you so free of secrets?" Teresa's eyes flickered, but she held his gaze. "I've nothing to hide, Monsieur Poirot. I loved my aunt, even if she was difficult. If you want to know about secrets, you might ask Miss Lawson. She's the one who's been skulking about, acting as if she owns the place." With that, she turned and swept out of the room, leaving a faint scent of jasmine in her wake. Hastings let out a low whistle. "Good heavens, Poirot, this family is a powder keg. Do you really think Charles is involved?" Poirot sipped his coffee, his movements deliberate. "Involved, Hastings perhaps, but in what, precisely, remains to be seen. Come, we have work to do. The web of this mystery is tangled, but I, Hercule Poirot, shall find its center." The morning passed in a flurry of activity. Poirot, with Hastings trailing behind, made his way to Emily Arundell's study, a small, cluttered room at the back of Little Green House. The air was thick with the scent of old books and lavender, and the desk, a heavy mahogany affair, was strewn with papers, ledgers, and a few faded photographs. Poirot's eyes scanned the room with the precision of a hawk, lingering on the desk's intricate carvings. "Mon ami," he said, gesturing to the papers, "we must examine Mademoiselle Arundel's financial affairs. Money, as we have seen, is a motive most potent." Hastings, ever eager to be useful, began sorting through the papers, his brow furrowed. "There's an awful lot here, Poirot. Bills, receipts, letters. Where do we even start?" Poirot's fingers danced over the desk, pausing on a leather-bound ledger. "We start, Hastings, with the numbers. Numbers do not lie, though they may conceal. Let us see what story they tell." For the next hour, the two men pored over the ledger, their heads bent close together. The entries were meticulous, written in Emily's precise hand, detailing household expenses, charitable donations, and, most intriguingly, a series of payments to an account labeled simply X. The amounts were substantial hundreds of pounds over the past year, yet there was no indication of the recipient's identity. "Look at this, Poirot," Hastings said, pointing to a particularly large entry, dated April 10th, £500 to this X account. "That's an awful lot of money. Do you think it's blackmail?" Poirot's eyes narrowed, his moustache quivering with interest. "Blackmail, Hastings. Perhaps it is something else, a debt, a bribe, a secret investment. We must learn more about this X." As they continued their search, the door creaked open, and Bob, the wire-haired terrier, bounded into the room, his tail wagging furiously. He carried his rubber ball in his mouth, dropping it at Poirot's feet with a soft thud. The detective knelt, scratching the dog's ears with surprising affection. "Bonjour, Monsieur Bob. You are never far from the action, are you?" Hastings chuckled. "He's taken quite a shine to you, Poirot. But I don't see how a dog can help us with bank accounts." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Do not underestimate the silent witness, mon ami. Bob sees what we do not. Let us observe him." As if on cue, Bob trotted to the desk, his nose twitching. He pawed at a drawer, whining softly. Poirot raised an eyebrow and opened the drawer, revealing a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. Most were mundane correspondence with friends, notes from charities, but one item caught Poirot's attention, a small folded note, its edges worn as though it had been handled repeatedly. Poirot unfolded it carefully, his eyes scanning the cryptic text. It was written in Emily's hand, but the words were strange, almost coded. The second attempt must not succeed. The ball was no accident. "I fear the shadow moves closer." Hastings leaned over Poirot's shoulder, his breath catching. "Good Lord, Poirot, what does it mean?" "The second attempt." Poirot's face was grave. "It means, Hastings, that Mademoiselle Arundell knew her life was in danger. The fall on the stairs was the first attempt. The second was her death." The weight of the discovery settled over the room, broken only by Bob's soft whimper. Poirot tucked the note into his pocket, his expression resolute. We must proceed with care, Hastings. The spider of this web is cunning, and we are close to its lair. The afternoon found Poirot and Hastings in the village, seeking out Dr. Rex Donaldson, Teresa's fiancé. The doctor's practice was housed in a modest building near the village green, its waiting room empty, save for a bored receptionist filing her nails. Dr. Donaldson emerged from his office, a tall, lean man with sharp features and a reserved demeanor. His glasses glinted in the sunlight as he greeted them with a polite, if guarded, smile. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," he said, his voice crisp. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Poirot bowed slightly, his eyes never leaving Donaldson's face. "We are investigating the unfortunate death of Mademoiselle Emily Arundell. You were her physician, I believe." Donaldson nodded, adjusting his glasses. "Yes, I saw her occasionally. Dr. Granger was her primary physician, but I consulted when she requested it. Her health was declining liver trouble. You know, but her death was not unexpected." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Not unexpected, you say? And yet, there are irregularities. Tell me, doctor, are you familiar with any substances that might cause a green pallor in the skin?" Donaldson's expression flickered, a brief shadow crossing his face. "A green pallor that's unusual. Certain poisons, perhaps arsenic or some rarer compounds, might produce such an effect, but I saw no evidence of poisoning in Miss Arundell's case." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Of course, doctor, and your research. I understand you have an interest in toxicology." Donaldson stiffened, his hands clasping behind his back. "A professional interest, yes. I study the effects of certain compounds, but nothing that would apply here. If you'll excuse me, I have patients to attend to." As they left the practice, Hastings glanced at Poirot, his brow furrowed. He seemed awfully defensive. "Poirot, do you think he's hiding something?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Everyone in this affair hides something, Hastings. The question is, what and why?" The day wore on, the sky darkening with the promise of rain. Back at Little Green House, Poirot requested an audience with Miss Lawson, Emily's companion. They found her in the drawing room, fussing over a tray of tea things, her hands trembling slightly as she poured. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice high and nervous, "I hope you're finding your stay comfortable. It's been so difficult since dear Emily passed." Poirot seated himself, his posture impeccable. "The comfort is most adequate, Mademoiselle Lawson, but I am more interested in your recollections. Tell me, what was Mademoiselle Arundel's state of mind before her death?" Miss Lawson's hands fluttered to her throat, clutching a string of pearls. "Oh, she was troubled. After her fall, she was convinced someone had tried to harm her. She kept talking about Bob's ball, but I told her it was nonsense. Bob's such a good dog, you know." Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but insistent. "And the letter, Mademoiselle, the one she wrote to me on April 17th, why did it not reach me until June?" Miss Lawson's eyes widened, her face paling. "The letter, I don't know anything about that. Emily wrote so many letters, you see, and the post here can be unreliable." Her words trailed off under Poirot's unrelenting gaze. He rose, pacing slowly before the fireplace. "Unreliable, you say? Yet the village postmaster assures me the service is most efficient. Tell me, mademoiselle, did you handle Mademoiselle Arundel's correspondence?" Miss Lawson's hands twisted in her lap. "Sometimes, yes, but I swear, I never saw that letter. I would have sent it at once." Poirot stopped pacing, his eyes boring into hers. "And yet, it was delayed to months, mademoiselle. 2 months during which Mademoiselle Arundell met her end. A curious coincidence, n'est-ce pas?" Miss Lawson burst into tears, burying her face in her hands. Hastings, ever the gentleman, offered his handkerchief, but Poirot remained unmoved, his expression one of quiet determination. As evening fell, the rain arrived, a steady patter against the windows of Little Green House. Poirot and Hastings retired to their rooms, but sleep eluded them. Hastings sat by the fire, his mind racing, while Poirot stood at the window, staring into the storm. "Hastings," Poirot said at last, his voice barely audible over the rain. "The web tightens, but the spider remains unseen. The letter, the poison, the tripwire, the money, all threads leading to the truth. And Bob, our silent witness, he holds the key." Hastings frowned, puzzled. "Bob, but he's just a dog, Poirot. How can he hold the key?" Poirot turned, his eyes alight with certainty. "Because, mon ami, he sees what we cannot." His instincts, his actions, they point to the heart of this affair. Tomorrow, we shall follow where he leads. As the rain drummed on, Poirot's words hung in the air, a promise of revelations to come. The tangled web of Little Green House was beginning to unravel, and Hercule Poirot was determined to find its center. Chapter 9. The Silent Witness Speaks. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Little Green House, casting dappled shadows across the oak-paneled dining room. Hercule Poirot stood at the window, his small, immaculate figure silhouetted against the golden light. His hands were clasped behind his back, his head tilted slightly, as if listening to an inaudible melody. The air was thick with anticipation, a palpable tension that seemed to hum through the very walls of the old estate. Captain Hastings, seated at the polished mahogany table, fidgeted with his coffee spoon, his brow furrowed with the weight of the mystery that had consumed them for days. Poirot, Hastings ventured, breaking the silence. "You've been uncommonly quiet this morning. Have you solved it? Do you know who's behind Miss Arundel's death?" Poirot turned, his green eyes glinting with a quiet intensity. "Mon ami, the solution is near, so near, I can almost touch it. But we must proceed with care. The truth, like a delicate soufflé, requires precision to rise perfectly." He paused, stroking his meticulously groomed mustache. "Today, we shall stage a little drama, a reenactment, to coax the silent witness to speak." Hastings blinked, puzzled. "The silent witness? You mean Bob, the dog?" "Precisement," Poirot replied, a faint smile curling his lips. "Bob has been our guide, has he not? His instincts, his habits, they tell a story the human tongue cannot conceal. We shall use him to unravel the final thread." The household was summoned to the drawing-room at precisely 10 o'clock. The atmosphere was charged, as though a storm brewed just beyond the horizon. Ellen, the housekeeper, stood near the door, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes darting nervously. Miss Lawson, Emily Arundel's former companion, perched on the edge of a velvet-upholstered chair, her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief into knots. Charles Arundel leaned against the fireplace, his handsome face set in a mask of nonchalance, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Teresa, his sister, sat with her legs crossed, her elegant silk dress catching the light, her expression one of barely concealed impatience. Dr. Neo's Bella's husband stood apart, his shoulders hunched, his gaze fixed on the floor. Bella herself was absent, tending to her children upstairs, though her absence only heightened the tension. And at the center of it all was Bob, the wire-haired terrier, lying contentedly near Poirot's feet, his rubber ball clutched possessively between his paws. Poirot stepped forward, his presence commanding the room despite his diminutive stature. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and measured, "we stand at the precipice of truth. The death of Miss Emily Arundel was no accident, no mere consequence of age or ailment. It was murder deliberate, calculated, and cloaked in deception. Today, we shall uncover the hand that struck her down." A murmur rippled through the room. Miss Lawson gasped, her handkerchief fluttering to the floor. Charles raised an eyebrow, his lips twitching into a half-smile. "Murder, you say? That's a bit dramatic, isn't it, Mr. Poirot?" "Dramatic, perhaps," Poirot replied, his eyes locking onto Charles's. "But true. And to prove it, we shall return to the scene of the first crime, the staircase, where Miss Arundel fell." The group followed Poirot to the grand staircase that dominated Little Green House's entrance hall. The polished oak steps gleamed under the chandelier's soft glow, each one a silent testament to the night Emily Arundel's fate was sealed. Poirot paused at the top, gesturing to the spot where Emily had tumbled. "Here," he said, "on the night of April 17th, Miss Arundel fell. A fall, we were told, caused by Bob's ball left carelessly on the stairs. But I, Hercule Poirot, say this was no accident. It was a trap." Hastings, standing at the base of the stairs, frowned. "A trap? But Poirot, we've been over this. The nail hole you found it suggests a tripwire." "Yes, but how do we prove it?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "With the help of our silent witness, mon ami, Bob, Venny I." He clapped his hands, and the terrier bounded up the stairs, his tail wagging furiously. Poirot knelt beside him, stroking his wiry fur. "Bob, you know this house better than any of us. Show us what you saw that night." The group watched, puzzled, as Poirot placed Bob's ball at the top of the stairs, just beyond the 5th step. "Now," he said, addressing the dog, "fetch your ball." as you always do." Bob hesitated, his ears pricking up, his nose twitching. Instead of bounding forward, he circled the 5th step, whining softly, his eyes fixed on the spot where the nail hole had been discovered. He refused to cross it, instead sitting back on his haunches, his gaze shifting to Poirot, as if in warning. "Good heavens!" Hastings exclaimed. "He's avoiding that step entirely." "Exactement," Poirot said, rising to his feet. "Bob knows this step is dangerous. His instincts, honed by routine, tell him something was amiss that night. A wire, perhaps, stretched taut to trip his mistress. This confirms what I suspected. The fall was orchestrated." Miss Lawson's voice trembled as she spoke. "But who would do such a thing? Poor Miss Arundell, she was so kind, so generous." "Generous, yes," Poirot said, turning to her. "But to whom? That, mademoiselle, is the question. Let us return to the drawing room, where I shall lay bare the threads of this tangled web." Back in the drawing room, the tension was thicker than ever. Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind him, his voice taking on a hypnotic cadence. "The first clue was the letter Miss Arundell wrote to me on April 17th, yet which did not reach me until June 28th. Why the delay? I investigated, and I learned of a temporary postman, a drifter who vanished in May. A convenient coincidence, Nan. But I, Hercule Poirot, do not believe in coincidences." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "Someone ensured that letter was withheld. Someone who knew its contents could expose their plan. And that someone, Mies Amos, is among us." Dr. Tenios shifted uncomfortably, his fingers tightening around the arm of his chair. "This is absurd," he muttered, his voice strained. "You're spinning tales, Mr. Poirot, tales." Poirot's voice sharpened. "Nan, Monsieur, facts. Let us consider your movements. Dr. Tenios, you were in the village during the period the letter was delayed. You were seen by the postmistress, were you not, inquiring about a parcel? A curious detail for a man who claims to have been travelling abroad." Tanios's face paled, his eyes darting to the door. I don't know what you mean. I was in London, attending to business." "Business?" Poirot's tone was laced with irony. "Or perhaps you were ensuring Miss Arundell's cry for help went unheard. You see, I have evidence from the postmistress, who recalls your visit vividly. And then there is the matter of the vial of powder found in the garden shed. A substance matching traces in Miss Arundell's bedroom. A poison, perhaps." The room fell silent, save for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock. Miss Lawson's eyes widened, her hands trembling. "Poison," she whispered. "Oh, heavens, no." Charles leaned forward, his nonchalance fading. "Hold on, Poirot. You're saying someone poisoned Aunt Emily after the fall?" "Precisely," Poirot said. "The fall was the first attempt, a clumsy one, designed to look accidental. When it failed to kill her, the murderer turned to a more insidious method. But they underestimated the silent witness Bob, who guarded his mistress's room, who sensed the danger on the stairs." Teresa's voice cut through the silence, sharp and defiant. "This is ridiculous. You're accusing Dr. Tanios based on a dog's behavior. What proof do you have?" Poirot turned to her, his expression unyielding. "Proof, Mademoiselle Teresa. I have more than you imagine. But let us hear from another witness." He turned to the door, where Ellen stood, her face pale but resolute. "Ellen, si vous plot, tell us what you overheard the night before Miss Arundell's death." Ellen stepped forward, her voice steady despite her evident nerves. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, sir, but I heard Dr. Tanios speaking in the library. He was on the telephone late at night. He said something about the plan and making sure it's done. I didn't think much of it then, but after Miss Emily died, I wondered." Tenios leaped to his feet, his face flushed with anger. "This is slander. I never said such things. You're all conspiring against me." "Calm yourself, Monsieur Poirot," said, his voice like steel. "Your agitation betrays you. And there is more. Bella, your wife, has confided in me. She overheard you discussing a second attempt with an accomplice, someone whose identity remains hidden for now." The mention of Bella seemed to drain the fight from Tanios. He sank back into his chair, his hands covering his face. "Bella, she wouldn't." "She did," Poirot said softly, almost pityingly. "She loves you, monsieur, but she fears you more. She fears what you have done to secure your family's future." Hastings, unable to contain himself, blurted, "Poirot, are you saying Tenios is the murderer? That he set the tripwire and poisoned Miss Arundell?" Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. Patience, mon ami. We are close, but not yet at the end. Tomorrow, we shall gather again, and I shall reveal the full truth, the motive, the method, and the mastermind behind this crime. For now, let us retire and reflect. The silent witness has spoken, but the final word belongs to Hercule Poirot. As the group dispersed, their faces a mixture of shock, fear, and suspicion. Poirot lingered by the staircase, Bob at his side. He knelt, scratching the dog's ears, and murmured, "You have done well, mon petit. Tomorrow, we shall bring this mystery to its close." The next morning, Little Green House buzzed with a nervous energy. The household had barely slept, each member wrestling with the implications of Poirot's accusations. Hastings, bleary-eyed but alert, joined Poirot in the garden, where the detective was examining a rosebush with an almost comical intensity. Hastings said, "You were rather dramatic yesterday. Do you really believe Tanios is our man?" Poirot straightened, brushing a speck of dirt from his sleeve. "Believe, Hastings. I do not believe no, but the truth is like a mosaic. Each piece must be placed with care. Yesterday, we confirmed the tripwire and the letter's delay. Today, we shall uncover the heart of the motive." They returned to the drawing room, where the suspects had gathered once more. Bella was present this time, her face drawn, her children nowhere to be seen. Poirot stood before the fireplace, his posture erect, his eyes scanning each face with piercing clarity. "Let us revisit the night of April 17th, he began. "Miss Arundell fell, but she survived. Why, then, did she die 2 weeks later?" "Because the murderer, realizing their first attempt had failed, resorted to poison a rare toxin, administered subtly, perhaps in her nightly tea. The green pallor noted by Dr. Granger was no coincidence. It was the mark of death." He turned to Dr. Tenios, whose hands were clenched tightly in his lap. "You, monsieur, have knowledge of such toxins. Your research, your travels, they provided access to substances few could obtain. And your motive, the fortune of Miss Arundell, which you hoped to secure for your children through Bella." Bella gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Jacob, no. Tell me it isn't true." Tenios's face crumpled, but he said nothing. Poirot continued, relentless. "You set the tripwire, hoping to make the fall look accidental. When that failed, you turned to poison, delaying Miss Arundell's letter to me to ensure your plan went undetected. But you did not count on Bob, whose loyalty to his mistress revealed your scheme." Charles, unable to stay silent, interjected, "But what about Miss Lawson? She got the money in the new will. Surely she had a hand in this." Poirot shook his head. "Miss Lawson was a pawn, manipulated by your charm. Dr. Tenios, you encouraged her loyalty to Miss Arundell, knowing she would inherit if the family was disinherited. Her role was unwitting, her guilt one of naivety." Miss Lawson burst into tears, her sobs echoing through the room. Teresa, her eyes blazing, stood. "This is monstrous. You're accusing a man without proof, Poirot." "Proof?" Voice was calm but unyielding. "I have the testimony of the postmistress, the chemical analysis of the vial, Bob's behavior, and Bella's confession. And there is one final piece, the coded note found in Miss Arundell's desk, which I have deciphered. It reads, 'Beware the second attempt. She knew, Ms. Amos, that her life was in danger.'" Tenios's shoulders slumped, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't mean for it to go so far. I only wanted to secure our future. The debts, the children." Emily wouldn't listen. The room fell silent, the weight of his confession settling like dust. Bella rose, her face a mask of anguish, and left the room without a word. Ellen, tears in her eyes, took Bob's collar gently, as if to shield him from the sorrow. Poirot turned to Hastings, his expression softening. "The case is nearly closed, mon ami. Tomorrow, we shall ensure justice is served, and Bobar silent. Witness will find peace." As the group dispersed, Poirot lingered, his gaze fixed on the portrait of Emily Arundell above the fireplace. She was a woman of strength, he murmured, and her trust in her little friend was not misplaced. "The grey cells, Hastings, they triumph, but it is the heart of a dog that has won this day." Chapter 10. The final revelation. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Little Green House, casting long golden slants across the drawing room. The air was thick with anticipation, a palpable tension that seemed to cling to the polished mahogany furniture and the faded Persian rug. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small, immaculate figure commanding attention despite the grandeur of the His hands were clasped behind his back, his mustache impeccably groomed, and his eyes, those sharp, green-grey eyes, gleamed with the quiet confidence of a man who had unraveled the threads of a tangled mystery. Around him, the suspects sat, in a semicircle of her-backed chairs, their faces a gallery of unease, defiance, and resignation. Captain Hastings, ever loyal, stood by the fireplace, his arms crossed, his gaze flicking between Poirot and the assembled company. At Poirot's feet lay Bob, the wire-haired terrier, his ears pricked, his rubber ball resting beside him as if he, too, sensed the gravity of the moment. The drawing-room was a study in contrasts. The elegance of its decor clashed with the raw emotions of its occupants. Miss Wilhelmina Lawson, Emily Arundell's nervous companion, clutched a handkerchief, her knuckles white as she dabbed at her eyes. Charles Arundell, the charming but debt-ridden nephew, lounged with forced nonchalance, one leg crossed over the other, though his fingers tapped a restless rhythm on the armrest. Teresa Arundell, glamorous and restless, sat with her chin tilted defiantly, her dark eyes darting to her fiancé Dr. Rex Donaldson, whose reserved demeanour seemed strained, his glasses glinting as he avoided her gaze. Bella Tanios, Emily's timid niece, sat beside her husband, Dr. Jacob Tanios, whose sallow complexion and twitching hands betrayed his anxiety. The housekeeper, Ellen, stood at the back, her arms folded, her loyalty to the late Miss Arundell etched into her stern expression. The Tripp sisters, Agnes and Isabel, the eccentric neighbours, perched on the edge of their seats, their faces alight with morbid curiosity. Even the children, Edward and Mary Tanios, sat quietly on a settee, their wide eyes fixed on Poirot, sensing the drama unfolding. Poirot cleared his throat, a delicate sound that silenced the room's murmurs. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, his voice smooth yet commanding. We are gathered here to bring to light the truth behind the tragic death of Mademoiselle Emily Arundell, a woman of strength, of principle, yet one who fell victim to a most insidious crime. This is no mere accident, no natural passing. Nan, it is murder calculated, deliberate, and concealed with cunning. A gasp rippled through the room. Miss Lawson's handkerchief fluttered to the floor, and Charles's tapping ceased abruptly. Teresa's lips parted, but she said nothing, her gaze locking onto Poirot. Dr. Tanios shifted uncomfortably, his chair creaking under his weight. Bob, sensing the shift in mood, let out a low whine, his eyes fixed on his master's diminutive figure. Poirot raised a hand, forestalling questions. Permit me, if you please, to recount the journey that has led us here. It began with a letter written by Mademoiselle Arundell on April 17th, yet not received by Hercule Poirot until June 28th, 2 months after her death. A delay, mes amis. That was no accident. It was the first thread in a web of deception, designed to ensure her cry for help went unheard. He paced slowly, his polished shoes clicking softly on the hardwood floor. This letter spoke of a dog's ball, a curious phrase. Nan, it suggested an incident, a fall on the stairs of this very house, which Mademoiselle Arundell believed was no accident, and she was correct. The fall was caused by a tripwire, a nail hole on the staircase bearing witness to this act of malice. But the fall did not kill her. No, it was merely the prelude to a more sinister method. Poirot paused, letting his words settle like dust in the sunlight. He turned to Bob, who tilted his head, as if acknowledging his role in the drama. This little one, Bob, the dumb witness, has been our guide. His habits, his instincts, have spoken louder than words. He does not leave his ball on the stairs. He sleeps in the kitchen, his ball stored in its proper place. Yet, someone placed that ball or something resembling it to cause Mademoiselle Arundell's fall, and when that failed to end her life, they turned to a more certain method, poison. The word hung in the air, sharp and cold. Bella let out a small cry, her hand flying to her mouth. Dr. Tanios's face paled further, his eyes darting to the door, as if contemplating flight. Poirot's gaze swept over them, missing nothing. Let us consider the facts, he continued. Mademoiselle Arundell's death was attributed to liver failure, but her physician, Dr. Grauinger, noted a peculiar green pallor on her skin. This, combined with a vial of suspicious powder found in the garden shed and traces of a chemical in her bedroom, points to a rare toxin, arsenic trioxide, to be precise. A poison that lingers, that kills slowly, ensuring the victim's cries for help grow fainter with each passing day. He turned to Miss Lawson, whose eyes widened in panic. Mademoiselle Lawson, you were the companion of Mademoiselle Arundell. You saw her fears, her suspicions. You spoke of her belief that someone wished her harm after her fall, yet you did not act. Why? Miss Lawson stammered, her voice trembling. I thought she was imagining things. Monsieur Poirot, she was old, frail. I didn't want to upset her further. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Yet, you benefited greatly from her death, did you not? The will, changed days before her passing, left the bulk of her fortune to you, not to her family. A curious decision, Nan. Charles Arundell leapt to his feet, his face flushed. That's right. She's the one who gained everything. If anyone had a motive, it's Wilhelmina Lawson. Miss Lawson shrank back, tears spilling down her cheeks. No, no, I loved Emily. I would never silence. If you please, Poirot said sharply, his voice cutting through the outburst. The motive, it is true, appears strong, but let us not be hasty. There is another who had much to gain and much to lose. He turned to Dr. Tanios, whose hands gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles white. Monsieur le Docteur, your presence in the village during the time of the letter's delay is most curious. You claim to be travelling, yet the postmaster recalls a foreign gentleman who interfered with the mail, and you, with your knowledge of chemistry, your access to obscure toxins, and your wife's connection to Mademoiselle Arundell's fortune, your children, after all, were to inherit through their mother, had every reason to act. Bella gasped, her hands clutching her husband's arm. Jacob, tell him it's not true. You wouldn't. Dr. Tanios's voice was low, strained. This is absurd, Poirot. I was in London, attending to patients. I had no part in this. Poirot's smile was thin, unyielding. And yet, the evidence suggests otherwise. The chemist in the village recalls selling a quantity of arsenic trioxide to a man matching your description. And Bob, our silent witness, has shown his unease in your presence. His instincts, they do not lie. He gestured to the dog, who had risen to his feet. His hackles raised as he stared at Dr. Tanios. The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words pressing down on them all. Let us reconstruct the crime, Poirot said, his voice taking on a rhythmic cadence, as if narrating a story. Mademoiselle Arundell, a woman of wealth and principle, stood in the way of someone's ambitions. Her fall, orchestrated by a tripwire, was meant to appear an accident, blamed on poor Bob's ball. When she survived, her suspicions grew, and she wrote to me, Hercule Poirot, for aid. But the letter was intercepted, held back by someone with access to the post, a temporary postman, perhaps, paid to delay it. And in those 2 months, the poison was administered, slowly, insidiously, until her life was extinguished. He paused, his eyes scanning the room. But who had the means, the motive, and the opportunity? Let us consider Mademoiselle Lawson. She gained the fortune, yes, but her actions were those of a pawn, not a mastermind. She was manipulated, her loyalty to Mademoiselle Arundell twisted to serve another's purpose. Poirot's gaze settled on Dr. Tanios. You, monsieur, are no stranger to manipulation. Your debts, your failing practice, the pressure to provide for your children, these weighed heavily upon you. You saw Mademoiselle Arundell's fortune as a solution, a way to secure your family's future. But she disapproved of your methods, your character. She threatened to cut Bella and her children from her will. And so, you acted. Dr. Tanios's face contorted, a mix of fear and defiance. You have no proof, Poirot. This is conjecture, nothing more. Poirot raised a finger, his voice calm but relentless. Nan, monsieur, I have the proof. The nail hole on the staircase, the chemical traces in Mademoiselle Arundell's bedroom, the delayed letter, and the testimony of the chemist. And then, there is Bob, his avoidance of the rigged step, his unease in your presence. These are not accidents. They are the silent testimony of a witness who cannot lie. Bella's voice broke, a sob escaping her lips. Jacob, tell me it's not true. Tell me you didn't. Dr. Tanios's shoulders slumped, his defiance crumbling. He buried his face in his hands, his voice muffled. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I only wanted to secure our future, Bella. The debts, they were crushing us. I thought a little push, a fall, would be enough. But she survived, and I panicked. The room erupted in murmurs. Charles swore under his breath. Teresa's eyes blazed with fury, and Miss Lawson wept openly. Ellen stepped forward, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "You monster! Miss Emily trusted you, and you betrayed her." Poirot held up a hand, restoring order. "Monsieur Tanios, you set the tripwire hoping to stage an accident. When that failed, you turned to poison, administering arsenic trioxide in small doses, disguised in her food or drink. You paid a drifter to delay the letter, ensuring no help would come. And you used Mademoiselle Lawson's trust, planting doubts in her mind about the family, ensuring the will was changed in her favor, knowing you could manipulate her later." Dr. Tanios's voice was barely a whisper. "I didn't want to kill her. I needed the money." Bella turned away, her face pale, her hands shielding her children's eyes. "How could you, Jacob? How could you do this to us?" Poirot's expression softened, but his voice remained firm. "The tragedy, monsieur, is not only the loss of Mademoiselle Arundel's life, but the pain you have inflicted on those you claimed to protect. Your greed has torn your family apart." He turned to the others, his tone measured. "Mademoiselle Lawson, you were unaware of the full extent of the plan, but your silence allowed it to succeed. You must live with that knowledge. Monsieur Charles, Mademoiselle Teresa, your own ambitions clouded your judgment, but you are not guilty of this crime. And Madame Tanios, your loyalty to your husband blinded you to his actions, but you are not to blame." He knelt beside Bob, stroking the dog's head gently. "And you, mon petit ami, have been the truest witness of all. Your loyalty to your mistress, your instincts, have guided us to the truth." Poirot rose, addressing the room. "The authorities have been informed. Monsieur Tanios will face justice for his crimes. As for Little Greenhouse, it shall find peace. Once more, Mademoiselle Ellen, I trust you will ensure Bob finds a loving home here, where he belongs." Ellen nodded, tears in her eyes. "He'll stay with me, Monsieur Poirot. His family." As the suspects dispersed, some in shock, others in relief, Poirot and Hastings stepped out into the garden. The air was crisp, the scent of roses mingling with the morning dew. Hastings, still processing the revelation, shook his head. "Poirot, how did you know it was Tanios? The dog, the letter, the Whodunit all came together so neatly." Poirot smiled, his eyes twinkling. "The grey cells, mon ami. They see what others overlook." The silent witness, Bob, spoke louder than words. His habits, his unease, pointed to the truth. And the letter, its delay, was the key that unlocked the mystery. They walked toward the gate, the countryside stretching before them, serene and untouched by the darkness they had uncovered. "Come, Hastings," Poirot said, his voice light. "There is a train to catch, and perhaps a cup of tisane to soothe the nerves." As they departed, Little Greenhouse stood silent, its secrets laid bare. Bob barked once, a joyful sound, as if bidding farewell to the detective who had understood his silent testimony. The case was closed, the truth revealed, and Hercule Poirot's grey cells had triumphed once more.